Because I'm into them. Just
Okay.
started listening to the,
Okay, I think we're live.
okay.
Good morning. Um, it's pretty small preschool as people are traveling home for the holidays. But I'm glad that we're all here together still. This week we actually wanted to talk about a speech by Martin Luther King Jr. that had referenced last. But is there anything you wanted to say before we go into it? Okay.
About the speech, about,
For the world.
well, I think, I want to thank Emily for, researching and finding this speech. And it's a speech given less than a year before Martin Luther King is assassinated, which I think puts the lie to the idea that he was an anti-revolutionary and a bourgeois liberal. That he was very opposite of that. I think, and as you and I discussed, that he addresses the young generation of that time.
Yeah.
And when we go through it, I'll give you my, because I was of the young generation of that time, and how I could see myself as one of the three groups that he was talking about. And I'll tell you about that. I think you'll find it interesting.
Yeah, because the reason why I was so attracted to this speech was last week we were talking about an emerging peace movement. And so I did what I always do, which is I Googled Du Bois, peace, Robeson, peace, Martin Luther King Jr., peace, and to see what are touchstones, the way they formulated peace movement. And I found this speech I had never read before. And what really attracted me to it was the fact that one, it's technically it was an internal document because it wasn't a speech that King wrote for the public, the way he, as an orator, would give speeches to different churches and at events as part of the movement. But this was something internal. So he's speaking to the SCLC internally at their annual retreat, where they talk about this is our plan for the year. This is like the framework we're working within. And what I found so interesting, but also moving, is because it's an internal document, there's so much trust with which he's speaking to his cadre. It's essentially someone speaking to his cadre. And he also, because it's internal, he's also giving an internal assessment of here's where the American people are. Here's where we are in the movement. Here's how we have succeeded. Here's where we still have to do more. Here are revelations we've had. And then specifically in the speech, what I really enjoyed was, like Doc said, at the end, he specifically talks about the youth. He's like, now let me get into the specifics of the youth, because it is the youth who is our main audience, because it is the youth who carry the future. And like Doc said, the SCLC, I just think that SCLC, at least in my generation, does not appreciate how highly disciplined they were. Highly disciplined, ideologically committed, like committed to ideologically, politically, and spiritually understanding what's happening, because they saw themselves as revolutionaries. They saw themselves as the people who should be governing society. And I find it to be, in fact, in some ways, more communistic, more like a communist party than the official party.
Right.
And so that's what I kind of wanted to also talk about with the speech. And so the speech is called.
Can I just say one thing? By the way, that's what Henry Winston saw in that. He actually did, and that's what Strategy for a Black Agenda is about. The ideological and political defense of both the first and second stages of the civil rights movement, which King talks about.
Yeah, which is deep. So, so just the in terms of the year, the speech must have been given January of 1967. So because the SCLC held their retreat every January of the year, because I tried to do research on that. The next report that's given is by Ralph Abernathy. After King's assassination, they do another retreat, January of 1968, so for the first time it's Ralph Abernathy.
See, King was assassinated in April of 1968.
Oh, so it must have been
It
1969.
had to be
Yeah.
1960.
So January of 1969. And the retreat was always held at Frogmore, which is on an island off of the South Carolina coast, which I didn't know either. So see that the discipline, these are full-time revolutionaries essentially, paid staff in the movement after like a decade of being in the movement. But so King, the whole point of King's speech, A New Sense of Direction, is he is trying to answer the question which they usually try to answer every time they're at the retreat, which is, what is the state of the movement? So interesting, right? And yeah, so he says, this is about the third time that I've tried to grapple with this entire question of the state of the movement in our staff retreats. The question of where we are and where do we go from here? And he says, I assure you, it isn't easy to have a new perspective each time on the same old question, but I've made an attempt to restate it in my discussion prepared for this evening. I hope as a result of our discussions, together we will be able to find new guidelines and quote, a new sense of direction. And then this is where he specifically says, we have been in two phases of revolution or two phases of the movement. In some ways you could call it he's talking about stages of revolution, where he says the civil rights decade, so the movement that was the movement they've been involved in building since the Montgomery bus boycotts. He explicitly says that was our phase of reform. It was a reform movement. And he said, and then he goes into it where he says, in the recent past, our struggle has witnessed two phases. And then the first phase began in the early 50s when Negroes slammed the door shut on subservience and submission, the agitation of nonviolent resistance to the oppressive conditions of our country. We moved Black people into the Southern streets to demand that their citizenship and manhood be respected. Considering that we were in the South with such a complex system of brutal segregation, indeed, we were inaugurating a rebellion. For merely to march in public streets was to rock the status quo to its roots. And so he identifies that first phase as rebellion. And then I'll go into it later, but in his 1967 State of the Movement speech to the staff, he calls it reform movement. But then he says, we are now entering a new era of the movement, and that is one of revolution. And so he identifies it explicitly as revolution. And he says, what is it? He goes into, he says, talking about the first phase of the movement, which was rebellion, this is what we know as the civil rights movement. He says Negroes became outraged by blatant inequality. Their ultimate goal was total unqualified freedom. Now he's talking about the limitations to the civil rights movement, the limitations of the rebellion. He says, but the majority of white progressives were outraged by the brutality displayed. So that difference between Negroes were outraged by blatant inequality, and their goal was total unqualified freedom. But the majority of white progressives were outraged by the brutality displayed. Their goal was improvement or limited progression. Obtaining the right to use public facilities, register and vote, token educational advancement, brought to the Negro a sense of achievement. He felt the momentum. But it brought to the whites a sense of completion when Negroes assertively moved on to ascend to the second rung of the ladder. A firm resistance from the white community became manifest. And so he says, resistance began to characterize the second phase, which we are now experiencing. And he says this second phase is going to the second rung of the ladder. It's the natural progression from fighting for civil rights to the fight for full freedom, which he identifies as the peace movement. Because he says,
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, because he says there's a triple, we're fighting the three evils, the triple evils, and that's poverty, racism, and war. And so that second, the higher stage, he's talking about this higher stage of the movement, higher stage of revolution that white progressives have not been moved to, whereas Negroes, Black people were ready to enter that second stage of revolution. And what's interesting is I talked about it last week, but what King is also, the assumption here is that he says something like war. What he's saying is that the reluctance from even white progressives to enter the new stage of revolution is also, for example, why he says it's caused by latent racism. And so even something like war, a war society, a war economy that is not challenged, that had not been challenged by white people, for example, it's because of not necessarily, it's not because of just a loyalty to capitalism, but he says it's white supremacy. And I think that's very important to identify, because you even see it, like I said, with Israel and Palestine, that a lot of people it's important to identify that Israel's war is based on the same white supremacy that America and the American war economy is based on. But then I kind of want to move forward.
Can I just say something? I agree with what you're saying, and it's very, very important. This is when King, who was the darling of the liberal establishment, when he goes to the second stage, he becomes scorned by them, dumped by them.
Right.
And his language here is manifesting that. And they use the thing of, well, you've taken up anti-war, you're no longer a civil rights leader. And, but they wanted to dump him because he, even on the domestic questions, he was talking about a change in the fundamental structure of the United States. That's what I went. And the liberals have dumped him, and then they seized after his death who he was and redefined him so that young people will never trust him and never see him as a revolutionary. I just want to say.
No, yeah, because that's when he also he responds to it in the next section of the speech, where he says that the challenge of the second stage of revolution is that it's been over a decade of the movement. And he says we face two distinct challenges, which is that Black people have become impatient. They're becoming impatient with change, with revolution, to achieve freedom. And on the other hand, there's a challenge of that white people are still there's still racism, that white people do not want that change in America that must be had in order for there to be freedom.
I think he qualifies that even further when he, as you pointed out in this speech, he will constantly reference the white man.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
And see that he said, I want to make it clear, I'm talking about the white people who rule the country.
Yes.
And it is they, by the way, I know I'm jumping ahead, but when he quotes Victor Hugo, the darkness, who produced the darkness that led to the sin. And so his reference to the white man is now, in his language, is moving to identify the ruling class as the white man.
Yes, as the enemy.
Yeah.
Because the reason why he spends time talking about it is because as the civil rights movement now is going to the second rung of the ladder, the next stage of revolution, he says and this is something Henry Winston also identifies, which is there's the problem that there's a false revolution being proposed. And the people believing that the next stage of revolution after the civil rights movement, rather than being a broader, higher stage of uniting the people against the triple evils of racism, poverty, and war, is the belief that the next stage is riots.
Is the armed
struggle. Like he calls it guerrilla warfare. And so he says, and that's why he says, but at the same time, he says, I'd like to examine both questions because, well, first of all, he says there's a sense of futility and frustration spread and choked against the hardened white attitudes. And so nonviolence as a relevant protest form was under attack as a tactical theory. Northern Negroes expressed their dismay and hostility in a succession of riots. The decade of 1955 to 1965, with its elementary constructive periods, had misled us. Everyone underestimated the amount of rage Negroes were suppressing and the amount of bigotry the white majority was disguising. And so he says, and now riots are at the center of the stage and being offered as the basis for contradictory positions by whites and Negroes. But then he says, I'd like to examine both questions. First, is the guilt for riots exclusively that of Negroes? And are they a natural development to a new stage of struggle? He says, and then he quotes Victor Hugo. He says, quote, if the soul is left in darkness, sins will be committed. The guilty one is not he who commits the sin, but he who causes the darkness. End quote. The policymakers of the white, so this is his part of the speech where he's assessing the movement, what's happening, like the contradictions that they have to resolve if they are to enter the next stage of the movement. And that's why he's getting into it, because he's always king as a leader of the movement, as the leader of the people. He has to look at, it's the way that we free school also examine, well, what's happening? What are the different trends? Why are people acting a certain way? But then also, how could they be weaponized to actually divide and neutralize the people? And so King says, the policymakers of the white society have caused the darkness, identifying the ruling class. It was they who created the frustrating slums. They perpetuate unemployment and poverty and oppression. Perhaps it is uncontestable and deplorable that Negroes have committed crimes, but these are essentially derivative crimes. They are born of the greater crimes of the white society. So when asking Negroes to abide by the law, let us also declare that the white man does not abide by the law.
Right.
Day in and day out, he violates welfare laws to deprive the poor of their meager allotments. He flagrantly violates building codes and housing regulations. His police forces are the ultimate mockery of law. He violates laws of equal employment and education. The slums are the handiwork of a vicious system of the white society. Negroes live in them, but they do not make them any more than a prisoner makes a prison. And so let us say forthrightly that if the total slum violations of law by the white man over the years are calculated and compared with the law breaking of a few days of riots, the hardened criminal would handily be the white man. And so it's him identifying the ruling class. There is such thing as a state, even. He's reaching a point of saying the ruling class, a state, an anti-democratic state that does not represent the people. And then in part of it says, I'm going to skip over a large section of the speech, but he also says, well, let me give you 5 reasons why there are riots. And this is the handiwork of the white man. He says, white backlash. So this is white people who are unhappy with the increasing demand for progress, and then white backlash in response. So white backlash, pervasive discriminatory practices against Black people, unemployment, which we see today across American people, the war in Vietnam, so conscription, the fact that the poor and Black people are mainly the ones who are sent to war, and the urban problems of crime and expensive migration. So that's his assessment. And then he later says, and now he goes into what about the future? What about now? He says, I must admit, I'm not totally optimistic. I cannot accept defeat. And he says, I believe that there are several serious programs, and now it's him proposing programs. I believe that there are several serious programs that can reverse the tide of social disintegration. Beyond this, I believe that as destructive as the riots may be, they have been analyzed in a substantially one-sided fashion. And he also says, don't get it twisted that no matter the riots, which are because of anger, especially of Black young people who are done with waiting and are done with the old system and are demanding a new system, something else. He says that it's a serious mistake, I feel, to discount nonviolence as a force present in Negro life. Many observers like to believe that the urban Negro is too sophisticated and too angry to be nonviolent. He is depicted as a sparsely controlled brute. These same observers rationalize the nonviolent marches and demonstrations in the South as irrelevant on the grounds that they were substantially percent high elderly ladies. And he says this is wrong. The fact is that in all of our marches, some men who normally were of very violent tendencies were fully involved. And he talks about that actually it's that the Black man is at the vanguard of the nonviolent movement.
Could I just say something? Oh, yeah. This is very important. Just to paint a picture, throughout a good part of the 1960s, let's say from approximately 63 through 68 or 69, every summer there would be urban uprisings. Every summer. And they would be in several cities, major cities at the same time, culminating in 1968 when King was assassinated. There were uprisings in about 160 some cities. But every city had these uprisings, usually sparked by an act of police brutality. But the underlying causes, as King said, were poverty and high unemployment, and so all of these conditions but but then the hypocrisy, and this is part of the passion and anger in his speech, that hypocritically the white man was saying to him through the New York Times editorials and just coming to him, well, you're the Prince of Peace. Why don't you tell your people to stop rioting? In other words, they wanted him to go and stand in front of young men and women in cities like LA and Philadelphia and other places, and excoriate them. You all need to stop. And he refused to do that, and that's why he's making the argument that the uprisings or the riots are just a symptom of impatience at the fact that equality is not come after all this time. The other thing is, not only did the ruling class threaten him, why don't you do so? I mean, just can you imagine these people pointing their fingers at Martin Luther King, saying, you need to get out there and stop your people from rioting, and that's why he quotes Victor Hugo, who created the darkness. That is where the sin is.
Yeah, I want to say something.
Hold on, wait, no. Hold on, wait a minute. This is very, very important in knowing who he's addressing on some of these issues. And there's one other thing I wanted to, but I wanted to, just so we know who he's talking to. On the one side, he's talking, but he's talking to his SCLC cadre. He's speaking to the movement and giving the movement language, concepts. On the other hand, he's saying to the ruling class, don't get in my face. You created this, and you have to change your system. If you're so much against violence, of which you are the most violent, change your system and the values of your system. But go ahead.
Okay, what I wanted to say was, it tells you in the Bible, it's a time and place for everything.
You have to speak up.
It tells you in the Bible that it's a time and place for everything. It's time to plant, it's time to reap, time to build up, time to tear down.
Right.
Nonviolence is a tactic. And it just happens to be a very appropriate tactic for the situation that we have here in this country at this time. You know what I'm saying? But nonviolence is not the tactic for the Palestinians. Okay, so I just want to put what we're talking about in an accurate perspective. I'm agreeing that is the most functional tactic for us in this time frame and in this situation. You know what I'm saying? But there's a time and place for everything. You know what I'm saying? Vietnam. Nonviolence would not have worked in Vietnam. And they did what they had to do.
Yeah.
Like 200 or 300 miles of underground tunnel.
I'm going to say something. I want to come back to that because he addresses that. And because King, let's come back to that. I agree, but let's come back.
And what you said was so appropriate. How can you tell anybody that they should not be violent? And you are the most violent person. You have genocided. Nobody has genocided like you. And you have the audacity. So, I mean, just to put it in an accurate perspective, you know what I mean? I speak dramatically.
Don't worry. Okay.
Because then he talks about, he says it's not wrong for especially young Black people to be so angry. And so he says, so what do we do as an SCLC? And so that's where he proposes Northern programs, and he says, now this leads me to say that we must formulate a program and we must fashion the new tactics which do not have government goodwill, but instead serve to compel unwilling authorities to yield to the mandates of justice. And then he gives examples, but he says, now there's scarcely any division among Negroes about these measures. Divisions arise only around methods for their achievement. I'm still convinced, and this is the basic point that I want to get at, that a solution of nonviolence remains possible. However, nonviolence must be adapted to urban conditions and urban moods. Nonviolent protests must now mature to a new level to correspond to heightened Black impatience and stiffened white resistance. The higher level is mass civil disobedience. It is a concept well known in our struggle for justice. There must be more than a statement to the larger society. There must be a force that interrupts its functioning at some key point. That interruption must, however, not be clandestine or surreptitious. It must be open. It is not necessary to invest it with guerrilla romanticism. It must be open and conducted by large masses without violence. If the jails are filled to stop us, the meaning will become even clearer. The Negro will be saying, I'm not avoiding penalties for breaking the law. I'm willing to endure all your punishment because your society will not be able to endure the stigma of violently and publicly oppressing its minorities to preserve injustices. Mass civil disobedience as a new stage of struggle can transmute the deep anger of the ghetto into a creative force. To dislocate the functioning of a city without destroying it can be more effective than a riot, because it can be both longer lasting and more costly to the larger society, but not wantonly destructive. It is a device of social action that is more difficult for the government to quell by superior force. The limitation of riots, moral questions aside, is that they cannot win, and their participants know it. Hence, riots are not revolutionary, but reactionary, because they invite defeat. They offer an emotional catharsis, but they must be followed by a sense of futility. Civil disobedience in its mass application has the prospect of success. It is militant and defiant, but not destructive. And then here he goes into the youth, his assessment of the youth. Since young people will have to play a great role in the kind of program I have rather sketchily outlined, let me say a few words about the mood of American youth. And I think this is really relevant to today, even like the response of youth to the injustice of what's happening to the Palestinians. This is important for many reasons, for the mood of youth is part of the mood of the nation in general. Under the impact of social forces unique to their times, young people have splintered into three principal groups. The largest group of young people is struggling to adapt itself to the prevailing values of our society. Without much enthusiasm, they accept the system of government, the economic relationships of the property system, and the social stratifications our system engenders. Even so, they are a profoundly troubled group and are harsh critics of the status quo. In this largest group, social attitudes are not congealed or determined. They are fluid and searching. Though recent studies point to the war in Vietnam as their focus of concern, most of them are not ready to resist the draft or to take clear-cut stands on issues of violence and nonviolence. But their consciences have been touched by the feeling that is growing all over the world of the horror and insanity of war. They sense the imperative need to respect life and the urgency of moving past war as a way to solve international problems. There's a second group of young people, presently small in number, but dynamic and growing. They are the radicals. They range from moderate to extreme in the degree to which they want to alter the social system. All of them agree that only by structural change can current evils be eliminated, because the roots are in the system rather than in man or in faulty operations. This is a new breed of radicals. Very few adhere to any established ideology or dogma. Some borrow from old doctrines of revolution, but practically all of them suspend judgment on what the form of the new society must be. They are in serious revolt against old values and have not yet concretely formulated the new ones. They are not repeating previous revolutionary doctrines. Most of them have not even read the revolutionary classics. Ironically, their rebellion comes from having been frustrated in seeking change within the framework of the existing society. They tried to build racial equality and met tenacious and vicious opposition. They worked to end the Vietnam War and experienced futility. In their concern for higher social values, they were thwarted by a combination of material abundance and spiritual poverty that stifled a pure creative outlook. And so they seek a fresh start with new rules and a new order. It is fair to say that at present, they know what they don't want rather than what they want. Their radicalism grows because the power structure of today is unrelenting in defending not only its social system, but the evils it contains. What is the attitude of this second radical group to the problem of violence? In a word, I think it is mixed. There are young radicals today who are pacifists, and there are many armchair revolutionaries who insist on the political and psychological need for violence. These young theorists of violence elaborately scorn the process of dialogue in favor of the tactic of confrontation. They glorified the guerrilla movement, and especially its new martyr, Che Guevara. But across the spectrum of attitudes toward violence that can be found among the radicals, is there a unifying thread? Whether they read Gandhi or Fanon, all the radicals understand the need for action, direct, self-transforming, and structure-transforming action. This may be their most creative collective insight. And now, the young people in the third group are sometimes called hippies. They are struggling to disengage from society and to give expression to their rejection of it. They disavow responsibility to organize society. Unlike the radicals, they are not seeking change, but flight. When
Could you
occasionally,
repeat that? They're not seeking change.
they are not seeking change, but flight. When occasionally they merge with a peace demonstration, it is not to better the political world, but to give expression to their own world. The hardcore hippie is a remarkable contradiction. He uses drugs to turn inward, away from reality, to find peace and security. Yet he advocates love as the highest human value. Love, which can exist only in communication between people, not in the isolation of the individual.
Right.
The hippies cannot survive as a mass group because there's no solution in escape. Most of them will regroup, either joining the radicals or drifting back into the mainstream. Some of them may persist by solidifying into a secular religious sect. Their movement already has many such characteristics. We might see some of them establish utopian colonies like 17th and 18th century communities established by sects that profoundly oppose the existing order and its values. Those communities did not survive, but they were important because their dream of social justice and human value continues as the dream of mankind. In this context, one dream of the hippie group is very significant, and that is its dream of peace. Most of the hippies are pacifists, and a few have thought their way through to a persuasive and psychologically sophisticated peace strategy. Society at large may now be more ready to learn from that dream than it was a century or two ago. It may listen to the argument for peace, not as a dream, but as a practical possibility, something to choose and use. And he says, from this quick tour of the three main groupings of our young people, it should be evident that this generation is in spiritual ferment. And I like that term because I actually think it describes the fluidity of today, where people are in spiritual ferment, but each have their own assumptions, or each have their own, they're in different places in some ways. And so he says, even the large group that is not disaffected from society is putting forward basic questions. Their restlessness helps to account for the radicals with their angry protests and the hippies with their systematic withdrawal. All three groups tend to concur in this flippant but profound comment on adult North America by a disenchanted student, quote, even if you win a rap race, you are still a rat. And so I guess I'll stop there for now, unless you keep going. I'll stop with the youth there. And then he says specifically, he talks about the importance of the Black young people who are part of the civil rights movement and who he identifies as the reason why revolution can now even occur, like their example, where he talks about how McCarthyism caused fear, and because of fear, it causes conformity. It causes, people to not want to go against status quo. But he says the blanket of fear from the 1950s was lifted by the Negro youth of the nation. When they took their struggle to the streets, a new spirit of resistance was born. Inspired by the boldness and ingenuity of Negroes, white youth stirred into action and formed an alliance that aroused the conscience of the nation. It is difficult to exaggerate the creative contribution of dynamic young Negroes of the past 8 years. They took nonviolent resistance, first employed in Montgomery, Alabama, in mass dimensions and developed original applications, sit-ins, freedom rides, and wade-ins. To accomplish these ends, they first transformed themselves. Young Negroes had traditionally imitated whites in dress, conduct, and thought in a rigid middle-class pattern. Gunnar Myrdal described them as exaggerated Americans. Now they ceased imitating and began initiating. Leadership passed into the hands of Negroes, and their white allies began learning from them. This was a revolutionary and wholesome development for both. It is ironic that today so many educators and sociologists are seeking new methods to instill middle-class values in Negro youth as the ideal in social development. It was precisely when young Negroes threw off their middle-class values that they made a historical social contribution. They abandoned those values when they put careers and wealth in a secondary role, when they cheerfully became jailbirds and troublemakers, when they took off their Brooks Brothers attire, put on overalls to work in the isolated rural South. They challenged and inspired white youth to emulate them. Many left school not to abandon learning, but to seek it in more direct ways.
Right.
They were constructive school dropouts, strengthening society and themselves. These Negro and white youths preceded the conception of the Peace Corps. And so he says, in the 60s, this is the crucial movement, this is the crucial time for the movements I have been describing. There is a sense in which the alliance of responsible young people, which the movement represented, has fallen apart under the impact of failures, discouragement, and consequent extremism of polarization. The movement for social change has entered a time of temptation to despair. And so this is where he changes and goes into the programs and into like talking about the future of the revolution, where he says, meanwhile, as the young people face their crisis, we in the SCLC must work out programs to bring social change movements through from their early and now inadequate protest phase to a stage of massive, active, nonviolent resistance to the evils of the modern corporate society. As this work and planning proceed, we begin to glimpse tremendous vistas of what it might mean for the world if the new programs of resistance succeed in forging an even wider alliance of today's awakened youth. Nonviolent active resistance to social evils, including massive civil disobedience, can unite, I believe, in a new action that synthesizes the best insights of all three groups of young people. Do you want to say anything before I read the end? And so there's a lot that I'm not reading because I also don't want to bore you with too much text, but he ends this speech by he goes back to his faith, like, because here you can see King, especially after he took his stance against the Vietnam War, and where all these people who were his allies were like, we don't fuck with you anymore. Like you're demanding too much. Like you become something different.
You become an enemy of the state.
Yeah, you become, and he's recognizing that. And so he even says, he's like, where earlier, did you notice how he says, I'm not completely optimistic? Because he's being real. He's saying, I'm not completely optimistic, but I refuse to accept defeat.
Yeah.
And he says, in any social revolution, there are times when the tailwinds of triumph and fulfillment favor us, and other times when strong headwinds of disappointment and setbacks beat against us relentlessly. We must be sustained by energies of courage or engines of courage in spite of the winds. This refusal to be stopped, this courage to be, this determination to go on in spite of is the hallmark of great movements. In the days ahead, we must not consider it unpatriotic to raise basic questions about our national character. We must ask, why are there 40 million poor people in a nation overflowing with such unbelievable affluence? We must ask, why has our nation placed itself in the position of being God's military agent on earth, intervening recklessly in Vietnam and in the Dominican Republic? Why have we substituted the arrogant undertaking of policing the whole world for the high task of putting our own house in order? For its very survival's sake, America must re-examine old presuppositions and release itself from things that for centuries have been held sacred. For the evils of racism, poverty, and militarism to die, a new set of values must be born. Our economy must become more person-centered than property and profit-centered. Our government must depend more on its moral power than on its military power. And he says, let us therefore not think of our movement as one that seeks to integrate the Negro into all the existing values of American society. Let us be those creative dissenters who will call our nation to a higher destiny, to a new plateau of compassion, to a more noble expression of humaneness. We are superbly equipped to do this. We have been scarred in the flames of suffering. We have known the agony of being the underdog. We have learned from our have-not status that it profits a nation little to gain the whole world of means and lose the end its own soul. We must have a passion for peace born out of the wretchedness of war, giving our ultimate allegiance to the empire of eternity. We must also be the custodians of creative Black power. We must find the positives in Black power and not be afraid to affirm that we agree absolutely with these positives. I have said it so often that our problem in the ghetto is that we are powerless, and we must transform this powerlessness into creative power. We are in desperate need to find our identity. We need to be proud of our heritage. We need to be proud of being Black and not ashamed of it. But in seeking our identity, we must seek it honestly. Every man must ultimately confront the question, who am I? And seek to answer it honestly. One of the first principles of personal adjustment is the principle of self-acceptance. The Negro's greatest dilemma is that in order to be healthy, he must accept his ambivalence. The Negro is a child of two cultures, Africa and America. The problem is that in the search for wholeness, too many Negroes seek to embrace only one side of their natures. Some, seeking to reject their heritage, are ashamed of their color, ashamed of Black art and music, and determine what is beautiful and good by the standards of white society. They end up frustrated and without cultural roots. Others seek to reject anything American and to identify totally with Africa, even to the point of wearing African clothes. This approach leads also to frustration because the American Negro is not an African. The old Hegelian synthesis still offers the best answer to many of life's dilemmas. The American Negro is neither totally African nor totally Western. He is Afro-American, a true hybrid, a combination of two cultures. Who are we? Let us not be afraid to say it. We are the descendants of slaves. We are the offspring of noble men and women who were kidnapped from their native land and chained in ships like beasts. We are the heirs of a great and exploited continent known as Africa. We are the heirs of rape, fire, and murder. And I, for one, am not ashamed of this past. My shame is for those who became so inhuman that they could inflict this torture upon us. We are also Americans, abused and scorned though we may be. Our destiny is tied up with the destiny of America. And in spite of the psychological appeals of identification with Africa, the Negro must face the fact that America is now his home, a home that he helped to build through blood, sweat, and tears. Since we are American, the solution to our problem will not come through seeking to build a separate Black nation within a nation, but by finding that creative majority and together moving toward that colorless power that we need for security and justice. I want now to say something that I'm sure you expect me to say, and that is that we must remain faithful to love and nonviolence. I must oppose still any attempt to gain our freedom by methods of malice, hate, and violence, by the methods that have characterized our oppressors. Hate is just as injurious to the hater as it is to the hated. Like an unchecked cancer, hate corrodes the personality and eats away at its vital unity. It has no boundary lines. I was talking just last evening with some of the young men who have decided to boycott the Olympics. One of the things that frustrated them more than anything else was the fact that they decided to make their announcement at a Black conference in Los Angeles. And they arrived at this meeting only to discover that Black people were beating and threatening to murder other Black people simply because they wanted to raise some unpopular questions. I said to myself as I listened that this, more than anything else, reveals to me that hate has no limits. I refuse to hate. I have seen hate expressed on the countenances of too many Mississippi and Alabama sheriffs to advise the Negro to sink to this miserable level. Hate is too great a burden to bear. Of course, you may say to me, this is not practical. Life is a matter of getting even, of hitting back, of dog eat dog. Maybe in some distant utopia, you say, that ideal will work, but not in the hard, cold world in which we live. My only answer is that mankind has followed the so-called practical way for a long time now. It has led to deeper confusion and chaos. Time is cluttered with the wreckage of individuals and communities that surrendered to hate and violence. I'm sure that many of you have read Frantz Fanon's book, The Wretched of the Earth. Toward the end, he says, quote, "So comrades, let us not pay tribute to Europe, by creating states, institutions, and societies which draw their inspiration from her.
Mhm.
Humanity is waiting for something other from us than such an imitation, which would almost be an obscene caricature. If we want to turn Africa into a new Europe and America into a new Europe, let us leave the destiny of our countries to the Europeans. They will know how to do it better than the most gifted of us. But if we want humanity to advance, to step further, if we want to bring it up to a different level than which Europe has shown it, then we must invent and we must make discoveries. End quote. And then Fanon moves on toward the end to say, quote, for Europe, for ourselves, and for humanity, comrade, we must turn over a new leaf. We must work out new concepts and try to set afoot a new man, end quote.
Mhm.
These are brave and challenging words, and I'm happy that young Black men and women are quoting them. But the problem is that Fanon and those who quote his words are seeking to work out new concepts and set afoot a new man with the willingness to imitate old concepts of violence. Is there not a basic contradiction here? Violence has been the inseparable twin of materialism, the hallmark of its grandeur. This is the one thing about modern civilization that I do not want to imitate. Humanity is waiting for something other than a blind imitation of the past. If we want truly to advance a step further, if we want to turn over the new leaf and really set a new man afoot, we must begin to turn mankind away from the long and desolate night of violence. May it not be that the new man the world needs is the non-violent man? Longfellow said, quote, in this world, a man must either be an anvil or the hammer.
Mhm.
We must be hammers shaping a new society rather than the anvils molded by the old. This not only will make us new men, but will give us a new kind of power. It will not be Lord Acton's image of power that tends to corrupt, the absolute power that corrupts absolutely. It will be power infused with love and justice that will change dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows. I must say to each of you that I have made my decision. And he ends, I've decided that on this question of nonviolence, I'm going to stand by it. I'm going to love because it's just lovely to love. I'm going to be nonviolent because I believe it is the answer to mankind's problems. I'm not going to bargain with reality, but I'm going to stand by nonviolence in spite of. And so I say to you that I've taken a vow. I, Martin Luther King, take thee, nonviolence, to be my wedded wife, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer. This isn't a bargaining experience. For richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. I'm going on in the faith, and with that determination, I believe if we maintain faith and then escalate our actions, we will be able to go to Washington and we will be able to create vibrant movement throughout the cities of our country. And by the thousands, we will move, and many will wonder where we are coming from. And our only answer will be that we are coming up out of the great trials and tribulations. Some of us will come from Mississippi. Some of us will come from Alabama. Some from Chicago. Some from Detroit. Some from Cleveland. But we will all be coming from the same condition. We will be seeking a city whose builder and maker is God. And if we will do this, we will be able to turn this nation upside down and right side up. And we may just be able to speed up the day when men everywhere will be able to cry out that we are children of God, made in his image. This will be a glorious day. At that moment, the morning stars will sing together and the souls of God will shout for joy. That's the end. Yeah, the end I find really emotional, but
Mhm.
just the one last quote I think that gives even more meaning to his last State of the Movement address to the SCLC is his 1967 address, which I think he actually gave after his stance against the Vietnam War.
Mhm.
Maybe it's before, but
Mhm.
it's when he is proposing to a very reluctant SCLC, because at that point the SCLC are saying, we're tired.
Right.
Like we've done over 10 years of organizing, like Operation Breadbasket in Chicago, like we're doing Operation, there are lots of operations they did in the South, the Freedom Summer, and they're saying, we're tired, can we take a break? And he says, no, it's time. That's why we need to go even faster to the new stage, the Poor People's Campaign. Like this is going to out of the South to the whole country. But he says in his 1967 address, where he makes the case for the Poor People's Campaign, it's called When Jesus Says Love, He Means It, where he says, Now, if we're to recognize that we are in this new era where the struggle is for genuine equality, we must recognize that we can't solve our problems until there is a radical redistribution of economic and political power. There again, we must not be fooled about this. We must recognize that if we are to gain our God-given rights now, principalities and powers must be confronted and they must be changed. And we must not worry about power. We must not worry about using the word power, because this is what is wrong in so many instances, is that we are devoid of power. That power is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. Power is the ability to affect change. The problem has been that all too many people have seen power and love as polar opposites. Consequently, on the one hand, they have thought of loveless power, and on the other hand, they have thought of powerless love. They didn't understand that the two fulfilled each other. And what we must understand is the nonviolent movement is that power without love is reckless, and love without power is sentimental. In other words, power at its best is love, implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is love, correcting everything that stands against love. These two are very basic. Actually, that was the wrong quote I was going to read, but I like this one. This is where he says for the first time, he says, he's talking about after Selma and winning the voting rights bill, we've moved into a new era, which must be an era of revolution. I think we must see the great distinction between a reform movement and a revolutionary movement. Now we are called upon to raise some questions about the House itself. Now we are in a situation where we must ask the House to change its rules, because the rules themselves don't go far enough. See, he's challenging the state here. He's saying the House must change. We are still called upon to give aid to the beggar who finds himself in misery and agony on life's highway. But one day we must ask the question of whether an edifice which produces beggars must not be restructured and refurbished. That is where we are not. That is where we are now. Now this means a revolution of values and other things. And he says, and then the last part I want to say is he says, this is his ending section of this 1967 speech where he says, we must see now that the evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are all tied together. And you can't get rid of one without getting rid of the other. Mm-hmm. Jesus confronted this problem of the interrelatedness of evil one day, or rather it was one night. A big shot came to him and he asked Jesus a question, what shall I do to be saved? Jesus didn't get bogged down in a specific evil. He looked at Nicodemus and he didn't say how Nicodemus, you must not drink liquor. He didn't say, Nicodemus, you must not commit adultery. He didn't say, Nicodemus, you must not lie. He didn't say, Nicodemus, you must not steal. He said, Nicodemus, you must be born again. In other words, Nicodemus, the whole structure of your life must be changed. Now, this is what we are dealing with in America. Somebody must say to America, America, if you have contempt for life, if you exploit human beings by seeing them as less than human, if you will treat human beings as a means to an end, you thingify those human beings. And if you will thingify persons, you will exploit them economically. And if you will exploit persons economically, then you will abuse your military power to protect your economic investment and your economic exploitations. So what America must be told today is that she must be born again. The whole structure of American life must be changed. And so and then he says, the cross is something that you bear and ultimately that you die on. The cross may mean the death of your popularity. It may mean the death of your bridge to the White House. It may mean the death of a foundation grant. It may cut your budget down a little, but take up your cross and bear it. And that is the way I have decided to go. Yeah. So I don't even know what to say because I feel like it speaks for itself. But and well, the last thing I also want to say is I do feel like today, well, I think that's also why in preschool, like, first of all, King is by far, he is an American revolutionary. And I think I said this when I was in school, and I don't even know if I know what I meant, but I think he's like Jesus. He's like Jesus Christ. Like when he says Jesus told Nicodemus he must be born again. King was the one telling America, you must be born again. And that's what Baldwin also said when he said, we're trying to achieve a new America, a new Jerusalem. And we're building a new Jerusalem. And I feel like there's the possibility. I actually feel like we are seeing different kinds of people who had a memory of this king the whole time, but maybe they didn't realize it was there. I feel like it's being awakened because I think you see it even with Jewish Voice for Peace, the level of civil disobedience that they're trying to implement against genocide, Israel's genocide against Palestinians. And I feel like you also saw it with that Rage Against the War Machine march last year when they could have chosen any place to build a new anti-war movement. They chose to go to the Lincoln Memorial. And it's because the last great American movement was held at the March on Washington. Or even at Penn, they've been doing a 2-week freedom school. It's called a freedom school.
Okay.
On specifically for Palestinians. And the whole reason is it's going back to the days of the civil rights movement, the king. And so I almost feel like there is a memory stirring where we can pick up from king, like this king that is still speaking to us. And I also just wanted to say that I think even when other people weren't, I think like Doc and I think free school as a whole, but especially because of you, Doc, I think free school has been keeping the torch, has been keeping the torch lit, even when other people could not see or dream of king and of this king. And so the Freedom School at Penn, it is true. I think it's also not just harking back to the civil rights movement. I think Freedom School is a term that has been kept alive by Society Free School for philosophy and Black liberation. And yeah, and I think that's so important. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful what you said. Well, let me say something.
Yeah, I was.
Hold on, wait a minute, Ransom. You know, this is very important. It is a foundational. I agree with you, Emily. It is foundational for the future. You know, I was just speaking earlier to Samir about a young man who committed an act that he thought was revolutionary and radical, which has gotten him sentenced to a year in prison, which is a slap on the wrist when you consider people like Brother Gregory Muhammad, 34 years. But nonetheless, he'll do a year for what he did, what he admitted to doing, and what did not advance the struggle at all, and was, in fact, a bad example of what a revolutionary is, although people who are like him, misguided, and in a lot of ways narcissistic, seeking cheap celebrity rather than to carry out the revolutionary practice that is long, enduring, and self-sacrificing. These people come and go, I can tell you that. They don't last long because what they're seeking is not freedom, but a form of celebrity. Let's be real. I'll say it to them on any occasion. The reason I can say it to them because at this time I'm in that second group that King talked about, and he described me perfectly. Many young people on college campuses and in communities had decided that King could no longer lead us, and that we were seeking leadership in the works of Mao Zedong, Frantz Fanon, and our reading of the Cuban Revolution. I would say in many ways we were far more intellectual in our politics than some of the younger people who were just in their actions. And I believed that the urban uprisings, and they were a real phenomenon in the country, and we interpreted them, while many of the people involved in them didn't interpret them this way. We interpreted that as the onset of the revolutionary movement, from the reform movement of civil rights, which means that laws were passed, to the real work of bringing down a system. And we thought that the only way you could bring that system down was through guerrilla warfare, urban guerrilla warfare. I believed in that. So I'm not telling you what somebody else thought. I believed in that. I then joined in with groups like the Revolutionary Action Movement, which was Maoist and pro-China. In fact, at that time, the leader and founder of the Revolutionary Action Movement, Robert F. Williams, was in exile either in Cuba or China at that time, with the protection of these governments. And so he was a revolutionary hero. Around the same time, 1966, the Black Panther Party was formed with the express program of armed self-defense. Not long after that, you get the Black Liberation Army, and even here in Philadelphia, there were small underground organizations committed to armed struggle, who in fact did carry out actions against police, killing police and that type of thing. And so that was present among a lot of young people. The other thing is, after I'm arrested and charged with a number of crimes I couldn't have committed even if I wanted to. But we then began in this knowledge that the system had to be changed. King had come to the same conclusion, but the method of bringing about the change that he proposes was different from what we saw. Now, as things evolved, we began to think, well, we have to study the system in order to change it. And this is when we began to study Marx's Das Kapital, Lenin's imperialism. And we had study groups, and I've told you all about the one I was a part of, and Fred Hampton was a part of that. And had he not been killed, assassinated, he, I think, inevitably would have become one of the major leaders of the Black Panther Party. Ideologically, he was more advanced than Huey Newton or Rich Cleaver or most of the leaders, because he was a part of the study group. He looked upon himself as a Leninist. And I didn't read this in anybody's book. This is what we talked about. He saw the Russian Revolution as that key moment, along with the Chinese Revolution in history. So I was a part of that. And so when King was assassinated, and this is a very personal part of the whole thing, I had never grieved his death. And I feel that a whole generation like myself never grieved the death of Martin Luther King, because, and this is what I'm saying to Samir all the time. Look, don't judge a nice guy, nice person, all that. Yeah, we're all nice. But the stakes are higher than that. Because what we perform, what we live, how we present ourselves can affect many other people. So, I might be well-intentioned, but what I'm doing is not progressive or positive. It's reactionary, reactive violence, which is self-defeating, of which the people who engage in it, I include myself among them, I was interested in bringing the system down as an act of historic revenge for what they had done to us. and even in some ways thinking that this would be a contribution, an act of, how would you say, revenge against the system that were killing Vietnamese peasants, that had assassinated Patrice Lumumba. So that gave a moral authority to it, if you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
A lot of young people, you see a lot of people who walk around and have Muslim names. You know, it's not because they were so religious. It is because they looked upon Christianity and hence King as espousing what was called then a slave religion. That this was the religion that the slave master gave us, not aware of its transformation in the hands of the slaves.
Right.
It's this, and there's something here that saw the slave as always passive and not the resistance of it completely. So we took on, many people took on Muslim names. Many people took on African names, African religion. This was all a part of that we are not Americans. That the only thing we can do is destroy America. You know what I'm saying? And of course, you know, it's not, you know, without some substance to it. This, you know, the long history of oppression, the even after the civil rights movement and King and all of this, that white America is still holding on to this, and the backlash, you know, so you reach a point, you know, we've had it. Let's get it on. We'll take to arms. We might not be able to win, but you won't win either, and we will so damage you. You know, and so you get the argument makes a hell of a lot of sense. King is saying, even in moments of despair, and this was a moment of despair, you know, okay, we got a civil rights bill. All right, the president said we shall overcome. What the fuck did that mean?
Right.
We're still the poorest group in the society. We're still the victims of police. You know, what has changed? The change that was that we thought was coming was never to be realized. But King said we now have to go to the second stage. And he didn't wait for the urban uprisings to arrive at that conclusion. It was already built into what he was saying, even during the stage of the fight for our legal and voting rights. You know, I just wanted to just a couple of few more things. So we have to soberly discuss these matters. We have to study this. It's not just a matter of what I feel or the way I see it now. You know, the reason I talk the way I talk, because I was involved in it. I can tell you from on the ground, ain't no book, nobody writing no book, no academic. I was there. And that second group, I was a part of that. I did not grieve King's assassination, and many did, who were wiser than me, because I felt that his assassination would trigger a generalized uprising and revolution. That's what I believe. I only began to understand him, and this is why Henry Winston means what he does to me. With that wise experience of a revolutionary, not a fake one. And they began to put the pieces of the puzzle together for me. I could then understand what King was, what the civil rights movement, what the second stage of that movement was, and could see a future. Now, of course, it would take a half a century to now get to this point. In the meantime, as Baldwin calls it, the long meantime, a lot of people lost their way if they ever had their way. You know what I'm saying? I know people, and like I say, I'm cursing people out daily. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm saying, well, why can't you wake up? My generation, cats that I came up with, they just can't do it. You know what I'm saying? And it is an ideological issue. You abandon the struggle in your 30s, your youth. And the brain is a complicated mechanism, shaped more by ideology than by biology. And you get the wrong worldview, the brain will adapt to the worldview that you have. You know what I'm saying? And that's what is happening. I can't get them to do it. Start giving up. Or just another thing. Let me finish my answer. I have a responsibility to all of these ones here, the young ones.
Yeah, I just want to let you know.
No.
I'm waiting in the wing.
I know you waiting.
I'm trying to stop. Because you're on a roll.
No. But let me explain. I'm not on a roll. I'm not.
Yes, you are, man.
No. Let me explain. I have a responsibility, and I really take it seriously. I could talk a lot of bullshit, but my responsibility is to the generation that will perhaps be able to cross the Rubicon and make the new society. And my experience, and like I'm talking about, and you know what I'm talking about, most of the cats our generation don't have anything to say to anybody, have confused more than they have clarified, and going to talk about incessantly back in the days. And I can tell you that most of them using back in the days language wasn't doing a damn thing then, and have ceased to be a factor in any, and that's what I want to say. So that's what I'm doing. But let me just continue. So what you're looking at in a lot of ways is a wreckage. A wreckage. Ruined potential. Unrealized potential. If you understand where I'm coming from. People who can become a part of something and so easily abandon it. There's something there. People who, even back in the days, were activists, who can so easily and cynically abandon things that are positive, with all kinds of excuses that don't make no sense, no kind of way. If you believed in what you did back then and didn't abandon it, why can you not be a part of the potentiality which is so apparent right now, especially in free school? Something happened worldview-wise. The worldview shifted so radically that the brain is incapable of processing and understanding the new. I did get off on a roll. Let me just say this, Rance. Okay. There is such a thing as the truth. There is. And the truth, like King is talking in biblical terms. A lot of people get thrown off on that. The radicals, the Afrocentrists. And believe me, I can say without fear of successful contradiction, they are all garbage. Backstabbers, opportunists, entrepreneurs. When the movement ended, I can make money off of selling a lot of bullshit ideas. And that's where you get a lot of academics. I was talking about one to Emily at Cornell, who gives a great speech attacking Israel for attacking the people in Gaza. And then the administration came down on him and said, look at it, dog. Who you talking about? Who are you? And the cat just rolls over and says, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that. And then we all supposed to write letters in his defense. I'm not going to defend you. I would defend you if you stood up. But you're nothing but a coward and a backstabber. So, stand with the people you're apologizing to. Bow and as they say, betray the world on your knees. That's right. But I'm saying, if you had something in you back in this time, why can't you get it together now? But they can't. It's been a shift. The other thing, I just want to talk to King.
Yeah.
Harry Belafonte, who died this year, was one of the last torchbearers.
Yeah.
And Belafonte remained faithful to that vision up until the day he died. It was Belafonte. The other, I think, well, of course, King's wife, Coretta, who you spoke about, you put it on so beautifully when we were in Chicago. Coretta Scott King, Ralph Abernathy, those who were closest to King, C.T. Vivian, Joseph Lowry, these names we have to know and resurrect. Of course, Diane Nash, the great Diane Nash, the great Jim Lawson. They remain true. John Lewis sold out. Most of the Congressional Black Caucus sold out. And Glenn is so beautifully brilliant on this when he defined them as the Black misleadership class, which have thrown the Black masses into confusion. We have not recovered from the decimation and wreckage of the Black leadership cadre. We don't have it. They've all been invented by people other than Black people. They are an invention, a parasitic imposition upon us. And that is why this is an interesting thing that in many ways, what is and will be the Black struggle and the people's struggle of this country, and that's what King is saying, the Black struggle will be the vanguard of the people, just like Winston talked about it, the centrality. There's no two ways about it. The Black struggle must, if the nation is to be reclaimed, play its central role. You can't do it no other kind of way. Identity politics, all that, academics, this, that, and the other. I would say to most, like King says in the speech, students left universities in the 60s to educate themselves in organic relationship to the working masses, to people who were illiterate. Most of what you have learned by these professors ain't worth a dime. So in other words, you overpaid for nothing. It was a scam. I hate, and it is. These professors, they don't know anything. It's a damn shame. The deaf, dumb, and blind, meaning the deaf, dumb, and blind, so to speak. A great irony is that the Black movement is being resurrected in the free school. There is nothing comparable to what we do here. When I say we, I'm not talking about me. Many people get it wrong. Doc, your students. No, I say they're not my students. I'm as much their student. And I mean that sincerely. The Black movement is being resurrected here because it is being defended here. In order to resurrect something, you must defend something. You must defend something. And I'm not talking about no bullshit. You're going to take a picture of Du Bois, and now you're going to be the Du Bois school. How you going to be the ain't never came to nothing? We've been doing this. I know I've been doing it for over 35 years here in the free school for over 10. Ain't never came to nothing, but suddenly you like Du Bois. You know what I'm saying? Like I always say, like me, like what I like.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That's why I'm not interested in friendly people. Excuse me. I'm interested in principled people. Because a principled person is a person you can trust. But we are resurrecting the Black freedom movement. And like you said, Emily, it's all around us. Ironically, Jewish people, I had given up on American Jews. I mean, gave up on them. Sellouts, opportunists, racists, I'd given up. And I came up in the Communist Party with Jews. I was mentored by Jewish people. Every year here in Philly, there were two little short Ukrainian Jews, old heads, Dave and Sarah Milgram. I can see, and every year they would organize an event to celebrate the 1944 Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in Poland. And I learned. But these Jews, like I was saying today, I didn't recognize these people and didn't want to have anything to do with them, right? Part of the ruling class, Zionists, all. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, disappears. You know, where did it come from? And this is what you said. There is a long memory. It may be suppressed, but given the right conditions, it reappears. Jewish Voices for Peace. What do they do? Mass civil disobedience. Who proposed that in this week? Martin Luther King. You know, shut down Grand Central Station. Shut down where what's the name of the synagogue that we were protesting?
Rodef Shalom.
Rodef Shalom. Rich synagogue, rich millionaires, you know? They hosted a dinner, $35,000 a ticket to fund the IDF's murder of Palestinians. So we were there to protest. And I saw a friend of mine, Nate Kleinman. All I knew was Nate is a farmer over South Jersey. I didn't know, and he gave a profound speech from the heart. Where does this movement go? I'm finished. Where does it go? Not the Black struggle. If not Martin Luther King, not those who in the face of the headwinds say we must find another way, we must retreat, we must go underground. But those like Winston, like Harry Belafonte, that says this must be preserved. The younger generations must know this. They must know, like you all must know it. And well, I'll stop there. That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
this is the king that most people do not know about.
Absolutely.
The king most people don't know about. And some other king that very few people know about. The King Papers. Did you read and critically think the King Papers? The King Papers. Martin Luther King said that he talked about the mythological system that became Christianity, it having been taken from ancient Egypt or ancient Kemet. And he broke that down. You know what I'm saying? Nobody knows that. Unless you read and quickly trust the King Papers. But what he did was, because the vast majority of people respond to Christianity, and then he came up in a Christian environment, and that was a platform that he could reach people. But if you notice, Martin Luther King never preached, all the sermons he did, never preached the gospel. See what I'm saying? So he was, and when I'm using the word mythological system as a myth being a special language that you utilize to express a supreme truth that needs to be cloaked in a special language. So King was a lot deeper than most people really know. And
Yeah.
that was the reason that he had to die. But this is very, very interesting. And like I said, if they really see, they watered down powerful images that they feel are too strong and will cause and will facilitate transformation. Like the way they did. I mentioned this, man. I knew not to go to this. But the thing they did with the feature film they did on Harry Tubman. Now you Google it. I'm going to Google it. It comes up 300, and you're going to say in a feature film like this that she brought back 30 people. You watered down her image because of how potent it was. You felt that it was too potent for the black mind. That this woman walked on foot and brought back 300 people, and you couldn't touch her. And you put the equivalent of $40,000 on her head, which is equivalent to $2 billion today, and still couldn't touch her. If they were to get repetitions of images like that, it will facilitate a transformation. So me personally, in 1990, I totally dropped not just television, but mainstream media, even mainstream pop culture. Pop culture, in my opinion, don't laugh because I'm serious. In my opinion, pop culture has not been art since 1977. And that was before, because it was against the law. You couldn't own with so many radio stations. And then they changed the law in the Congress where you could buy as much media as your money could buy. That's when Clear Channel and all these corporations came into existence, and they threw ridiculous money at these stations. And it wasn't a matter of whether you were going to sell, it was just a matter of when, because the money was so ridiculous. And now you can drive from this is ridiculous. You can drive from New York all the way to California and run into a Power 99 type station. Not just the same music, the same sequence of music. So I personally refuse to when that changes like that, I totally rejected personally mainstream media. And it used to be a time where DJ could bring anybody he wanted into and have them talk, or he could play whole albums, or he could go from Coltrane to Jimi Hendrix to but that is gone, and that can only be now experienced on the underground in this country. So yeah, so King, yeah, this is the king, that king.
Yeah,
That's all I got.
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say I'm really glad that we had a chance to read and discuss this speech because I do think that it's very applicable for today. And actually, this is something that we were talking about over dinner last night, but in a lot of ways, it's not just that I feel like there's the memory of the civil rights movement, but that part of the reason why we, for instance, in the Free School are so interested in this history is because actually we are the children of it. We are the
Right.
children of the civil rights
No,
movement.
it's no question.
And I see it in a similar way where, for instance, Du Bois, when he wrote Black Reconstruction, he too was a children of the Reconstruction. He was a child of the Reconstruction era.
Mhm.
And he was trying to make sense of that history which had produced him, which had produced his generation of Black folk, but which had also produced the contradictions of American society that led to the Great Depression, the greatest crisis that the nation had seen of capitalism at that point. And in a lot of ways, I feel like also King too, this is why, he then went to Du Bois to make sense of what had produced basically everything that led up to the civil rights movement. And that's why he talks about, in the speech honoring Du Bois, he talks about Black Reconstruction and its lessons for that moment. And I feel like in a lot of ways, whether it's conscious or unconscious or kind of half conscious, yeah, like even the people in Jewish Voice for Peace, it's like they're like in the midst of basically the greatest crisis in American history right now, people have to go back to that history to make sense of what has made this moment, both the revolutionary aspect of it, but also the counter-revolutionary, the reaction, because we are the products of both of that contradiction in a lot of ways. And yeah, I wanted, I guess, to I guess reflect on what King talks about in the speech in terms of how he describes the civil rights movement as a social revolution, because I think it gets to what we talk about a lot in Free School, which is essentially what is the logic of the American revolutionary process. Because I think something that I feel like it's in some ways like we're still trying to work out is this question of like the state also, because he like touches on it, but I think the specific formulation of how he understood the question of the state, of state power, of nonviolence, of the revolutionary process, I think is very important to kind of like tease apart in a lot of ways.
Can I ask you a question? Did you happen to see the discussion with James Lawson on this matter of the state?
Oh, from your body, right?
At my house.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, did you see, because
Right.
if you remember,
Yeah.
I just want to
Well,
remember what Lawson said, because it was the question of
right.
can there be a non-violent seizure of state power? Because every revolutionary has said that the state has to be seized through violent means. And if you recall, he said that we nonviolent thinkers have not worked out that problem yet. I think I'm quoting it.
Right. Because in some ways, because you can also look at it from different angles to the extent of, like, if you take, for example, the Russian Revolution, right? It was simultaneously the seizure and basically also the abolishing of the czarist, government, also the kind of bourgeois democratic government, I guess, that had emerged. But it was also something that I've been thinking about a lot over the past couple of months is how Lenin, it's not just that the Bolsheviks had to seize state power, but that the reason why Lenin had the confidence in the Russian Revolution is because he saw in the Soviets this new emergence of basically like a new kind of regime, a new kind of government, a new kind of democracy that was basically emerging through the organic kind of formations and self-governance of the Soviets. And I think it's not, you can't make always like a one-to-one correlation, but in a lot of ways, I think part of what is so profound about the civil rights movement is that it wasn't like exactly like the Soviet form, right? But you had with nonviolence and even like this first stage of the civil rights revolution that King talks about, you had basically a phenomenon in which like he sets up this situation of like McCarthyism in the 50s and how like basically this new generation of like young Black people and then the young whites who also joined them, that they were basically kind of fomenting like a new kind of democracy in the United States.
Yes. May I ask you a question, if you don't mind, you and Nuri, because I know you all have looked at the state. And do you think that Vladimir Putin is closer to King than to Lenin in his conceptualization? You think, you know where I'm coming from, Nuri. Take a shot at it, you know?
Yeah.
His Valdai speech.
Yeah.
Was King anticipating the civilization state, the state of the whole people, a state based on, well, let's say this, the ideology of the philosophy of love, which,
well, I can't answer that question in particular, but what I was also trying to like thinking through as Emily was discussing King's speech, and then also you were talking, is I feel like also because I was thinking about the concept of like the dictatorship of the Black proletariat from Du Bois and Black Reconstruction, where I feel like it wasn't as, let's say, overt as something like the Freedmen's Bureau that kind of emerged during the Reconstruction era, but I think in a very important, like almost like developmental way, essentially what took place with the civil rights movement is that you had first the actual existing government of the United States, right? And basically like the ruling class, which kind of emerged victorious, ascendant through the Cold War, after World War II, basically this birth of like the American empire as we know it today. And at the same time, you had essentially what was almost like through the civil rights movement, the Black proletariat became the determining force in the life of the nation. Whereas basically up until that point, it was literally like the ruling class, the ideology of white supremacy, of McCarthyism, all of which served to function to basically justify also in people's minds the regime of segregation, this vast edifice of American imperialism, these wars, all of the poverty in America, all of that. And I don't know. I was just trying to think about it in the way that like Du Bois also talks about.
But see, I think just on Du Bois, he never said that a dictatorship, I don't think he said a dictatorship of the Black proletariat was established.
Right, it was
the potential for it in those three states.
Yeah.
And I think it's just as you described it. He said because there were Black majorities, and out of this, the Freedmen's Bureau and other things, a dual power, which could lead to a a new state.
Because I was thinking about the civil rights movement through that language as well, the dual power, because it's not as in some ways like clearly formulated as something like the Soviet Revolution, but I think it's still helpful to think about.
But then the Soviet Revolution is not that clear. I mean, we have, I think, a narrative that is not all true. Right. Because I don't think the Bolsheviks, certainly not the working class in St. Petersburg, would be able to overthrow the czarist government, the czarist regime, I should say, the state, if the state had not already collapsed. So they collapsed and you walked in and said, well, we will be the government, we'll be the state, since nobody else wants to do it, kind of thing. The same thing, just one spot. The same thing in China with the collapse of the last dynasty, the Qing dynasty, where, and this is the promise of Sun Yat-sen and the Kuomintang at that time, but it was a lost opportunity in China. It took another, 20 some years, 30 some years for 1949.
Mhm.
And even then, there was no state. It was,
Mhm.
and the Shanghai Shek and Mao Zedong, they were fighting for who would constitute the state. So we have a fiction of what actually was going on.
No, well, because when King talks about the mass civil disobedience as like kind of the next
yes,
stage,
yes,
it's like almost what he's saying is that
yes.
he talks about essentially like we need to openly, in the
Yeah.
broadest possible
Yeah.
sense, in the broadest possible avenues of American social, economic, political life, we need to first paralyze
Yeah.
the normal functioning of
Mhm.
the state,
How?
Yeah.
right? But it's like it's also that kind of the dialectical movement where those kinds of, it's not just that you're like doing something against the existing state, which is important, which is also I think how kind of like this emerging peace movement with Israel, Gaza, the Jewish voice, all these different forces, but it's that also latent within those kinds of actions, that kind of movement, you have the creation of, how King said, like new men and women. But kind of the more like political way also of saying that is that you have the formation of new kinds of a new kind of democratic consciousness, new kinds of ways that people relate to each other. And I feel like it's all like almost within that is like the seeds of a new kind of society. Yeah.
As you speak, I can visualize it more than I think I ever have. That civil disobedience paralyzes the state
Yeah.
and its ability to both repress the people and to conduct war.
Right.
And then the question becomes, once the state is in this kind of crisis where it cannot function,
Right.
then what replaces it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like that's what's so important about nonviolence that King is talking about. That it transforms the people who undertake it, who take on
that's
this
the other
great
part,
mantle of nonviolence. Because like it's one thing, to like paralyze the state, but like actually, what comes after is basically like these new men and women who are ready to actually take on this awesome
Can I
responsibility.
just say one thing? People who are willing to become new men and women. Not just that they become it, but they want to be different.
Right.
And that's where he threw the ball back in the court of white America.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Do you want to be different?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Which is still on the table.
Right.
Yeah.
It is.
No, yeah.
Go ahead, man. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead, Nori.
Time to.
Oh, go ahead,
I think the violence also changes you, but it changes you in a negative manner.
Could you say that again?
Violence, Jeremiah said that nonviolence transforms human beings to be, the leaders of the leaders of tomorrow. I was just thinking that maybe violence also transforms you, but in a way that nobody wants to be transformed. And then that's the perpetrator and the victim.
But see, that's the claim of Fanon. That violence is necessary if the oppressed, who have been the victims of violence, are to be transformed. That's Fanon's claim.
I think Fanon means it in a cleansing way.
Yes.
Or does that mean it in a you hurt yourself kind of way?
No, he means it as cleansing.
Yeah, but Samir's thing.
I'm saying I don't mean it that way.
No, I know you do. But see, the question is, how do you transform the oppressed?
Yeah.
And how do you transform the oppressor? That was King's thing that he was talking.
Well, because I actually like the part in the
Because just from one small thing, because you always have the option of the physical elimination of the oppressing class, and that occurred in the French Revolution. It occurred in the Russian Revolution. It occurred in the Chinese Revolution. It occurred throughout China's history. That the way to end oppression is to physically eliminate the oppressors. And King says, but what happens to us? Because that takes a lot of bloodshed, by the way. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No,
Sonia.
that's what I'm saying.
Mhm.
I want to say a few things about King. Since we've been on this travail here, so I'm looking through my notes, but I'm really looking at the Desert Fathers. I'm not reading the Desert Fathers like on a real low level. It's a very high level for studying the lives of the different people who formed some of the Desert Fathers. The way King
Form some of the what's it?
it's a lot of religious thinking, but it's philosophical, it's political too. But
Yes.
this development of I'm going through King's life too because it's I call it Desert Fathers, and this the desert, like the people that live on the desert.
Yes.
These kind of training that some of the brethren would go into because you can't formulate the idea of the new man or the new woman because we're not conserving the strength of violence is that they'll just let the strength go to violence. But in the Desert Fathers and reading that I'm doing, the reading itself is a part of a prayer.
This is interesting.
But in the contemplative prayer, it's a contemplative action that's going to come behind it because you still need to have the clarity of what this thought is developing in the human being because we're on the frontier of a new humanity.
Right.
Like the frontier of a new humanity. And it's kind of hard dragging people across the desert.
Can I ask you a question? When you say the people who go into isolation in order to meditate,
It's a practice, but the overall thing is that it never finds its other basis to its strength, like within the strength of the school or the practices of the student, because I only can speak from what I'm hearing. If I don't hear it, I ain't gonna say nothing. But because of the practices of the student and it's like the body is being guarded because you're giving your body a certain condition because you need a lot of discipline, but you don't want to have to keep reminding yourself this is a long travail. You know, we can walk forever doing this because you need all of your principles. And I can't even say anything unless somebody delivers me something back.
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
And I'd like to ask Ransom the same question. Have you gone into a monastic life?
In my entire lifetime, even if somebody walked in my place, whether physically outside or inside or with my family, my relationships with human beings is that I've had time to go into monastic retreat, or whether it was in the Buddhist temple, or whether it was in the Hindu temple, or within my family way of life, my own family way of life, because I can't bring the whole self about it because we're part of the community. That's the whole thing about the community. You can't have this kind of community and to formulate. I wouldn't even. I could read Washington's papers and I can read Lincoln's papers, but only because they're addressed like the way this body is situated. Like if this was the Senate, or if this was the Congress, or if this was some high office, so that the other people that's sitting in office not doing anything, this is the way people will have the diplomats sent out, or the ambassadors sent out. But when you look into the mixture of it, what kind of person it is, I'm reading books from the principles that I followed for a lifetime already because I'm looking into, it's like I live in a cell. Somebody else is in a cell. But it's not the cell of the prison that we see people in prison in. It's the imprisonment because we have to still have a behavior that's part of the rule. It's like, what kind of rule? I read Franciscan notes and letters. Or Jesuit letters. Anywhere that.
Can I ask a question? I don't mean to keep it, but this is very fascinating. Yeah.
You know,
this idea of the monastic life, and then from time to time you re-enter into social relationships.
The active part of your life is that you have a life it's a part of an activity.
Yeah.
And since sometimes I hear the word practice, well, I might say I'm in practice but I have to practice still.
Yeah.
But you still gotta take all the wholesome things, and then if you're reading about the life of King, and King had to go through all these different kind of orders. He could easily be recognized in India, or like Bishop Tutu, or somebody somebody that was in one of those, some of those rules like in South America, because he's a man of stately peace. He's not a man making up peace. He's a man of the state. Like you using the word state, I'm using the word stately peace. Like the state is made out of stately peace. There can't be no state made unless people have a stately way of like addressing, like why people call people statesmen.
Interesting.
You know, why would a person call
Can I
statesman?
ask you just one other question, if you don't mind? So you see King, you see an exemplar of the monastic life.
And he's I might use the word brethren or brother and sisters, but I understand the brethren, they have active life, and it's not like it's not dead. Like you might say you wasn't mourning for him because you believe that his existence is a part of our existence still. You know, like something got integrity to exist, something that has integrity to exist because we have an existence that we live for.
Could I ask Ransom the same question? Have you gone into a monastic life?
And I'm gonna answer, no.
Okay.
I believe my view of monasticism is like mental and spiritual masturbation.
Oh.
The difference between masturbation versus the ebb and flow or the give and take of love. No. And then
But you
then I
like
visualize
sometimes.
and then I visualize like the spiritual, like the guru, and he's so spiritual, and he's and right outside you got untouchables. And you got untouchables, and they got rocks around the temple so that the tallest Indian, their shadow won't pass the temple.
Right.
Because you believe that their shadow will pollute the temple. But you are so
Right.
oh hell no.
But that isn't what.
So now,
hold on, wait a minute. No.
You almost cut me off.
No, but let me cut you, because
Let me say what I gotta say.
but address Derek's concept of monasticism.
What I'm saying is, you asked me, about monasticism, and I don't agree with it at all.
Okay.
And I don't believe in the root of spirituality is always corrupted at the level of organized religion. Organized religion, priest mystique, hierarchy. It then becomes the root of spirituality is imprisoned, and it then becomes a control system. And then it is true when they talked about the religion being the opiate of people. That is, we're not talking about spirituality. Now, you go all the way back down to the root, and if you transform yourself in the root, and if you trash all of the garbage around, imprisoning that root, all is well. And that's how I strive. That's what I practice. I strive to live like that. So, here's the last thing I want to say. In the Western paradigm or conceptualization of reality, everything is fragmented. Past, present, future. The past is not past. I'm gonna give you an example. You learn how to speak before you could remember. Every time you speak and use those words, the past is living. There's almost, you get to a point where there is a oneness of the past and the present and the future. It's a oneness, it's a flow. See what I'm saying? Everything is fragmented in the Western world. All of the sciences are fragmented. They fragment everything into millions of particles, and they don't have the unifying principle. Not to get too deep, because the heavy shit, I like to get it and quit it because I don't want to bust the gasket. You know what I mean? But
No, this is very important, because precisely what you said is part of what King is trying to find, that unifying principle of all life. It's very interesting. But go ahead, I cut Derek off. I mean, I didn't mean to interrupt you while you were speaking.
No, I'm done.
I'm looking at the responses that I hear when Jeremiah speak.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at in the midst because I'm still witness that, like Tony, I'm taking notes down because I know that this cannot happen if I leave this, when I leave this setting here, I'm going home.
Right.
But I can't create this kind of dynamic like out of nowhere.
That's right.
And then I gotta still recognize the individuals, they part of a collective, like, 'cause y'all have families, but they're not just march around like I don't care about people. There's too much evidence like that. But I have enough sense to know that this is not like something that happens every day. And I'm gonna say, I might spend my monastic time, right? I might have been in the mosque or the temple. I spent about 30 years with the Society of Friends. And that's not no little bit of time. That means that I did not know that there was silence, worship. I had to proceed with like occupation, but I was embraced by families. So I'm not just talking about a middle and his family, but maybe 50 other families that I've been with and shared ideas. But at least I understood that sometimes you do got to go among other people, and you can't be home like that's just where you just fall apart. So if we don't have this kind of active life, then the contemplative, he can't just go contemplate. Contemplation come with ideas and action, a lot of creative things, because Cain was working. And people know that he was this working body of like, I consider DeVos as an enlightened human being, like a Buddhist would. If somebody is looking for like a new Buddha, and I wrote in a book way decades ago that I found that his notes and his sense of urgency and how he distributed what he knew, it was equal to one of the baskets that they passed in the Buddhist world. It's like a basket that I have. It's a basket that passes around because it's certain for some equal principle that needs to exist. And he just did it. I'm watching him like, I'm not an abstract thinker. I don't know about that. But I have try to keep my holistic life together, and how hard it is to strive every day and use the word struggle and find better patterns of human existence and better cultural studies that give you a different branch of things that we need to learn from and not reject different parts that we haven't had time to live long enough to accept. King lived a long time for a man of his kind. For a man of his kind. I'm reading a book that I'm reading about desert fathers and people who have followed all of these roads. I might say that I was gonna play this music the other day by Saladin because the kind of studies I had from different teachers, they never said you need a Muslim name. If I was studying with somebody, it never offended me. I know offended them. They treat me like I was a younger person. I can learn from them, but I had to seek out more about why they took their time, like Tony with y'all. Why did this man take time? It took me from a whole school classroom and took me privately by itself. I was like, where the rest of the students at? He said they'll get here sooner or later, but right now you are here. So it was like an honor. I found it as a part of honor because I could learn more about my own personality, but I'm not a person that want to take things from other humans. I'm a person looking for other human beings that bring out what they know already. You just being cultivated because I'm sitting there waiting for one of y'all to say. When I'm talking to Michelle, I think she has the Confucius, and I have all the books home to support this. Like they lined up like a librarian would line them up, or they lined up like encyclopedias would line. Otherwise, I'm only could get a little. I don't ask for a mountain of confirmation. It's just having the honesty for the person to bring something honest from their heart and from their struggle. It's a lifetime struggle that you struggle with. It's not like you just came here. It's a lifetime struggle to bring all of these kind of particular great gifts to this table here.
Okay, who's next?
Well,
Go.
I'll just respond to Derek because I feel like in a lot of ways, part of what like we like face right now is, I guess you could almost describe it as a struggle on two fronts, like a struggle in two arenas, one of which is like it is like the mass civil disobedience, which I think is more public and open. But I think the other thing, which is part of what we do in the free school, and I feel like is also how I understand your Baldwin, is because so much of the crisis of like even American society right now is like the social fabric, like the social fragmentation, the basic fact that people don't trust each other and want to withdraw inwards. And part of what we are trying to do, like tirelessly almost in the free school, is we want to draw people out back into society, but into a new kind of social life. We want to re-socialize people in a new way, where it's like, yeah, like people shouldn't be afraid to want to be in community with each other, but not just in like a shallow way where you really bond over like the fact that you like the same sports team. But it's like you bond, like people need to form new social bonds, which is on the basis of like, no, we are the inheritors of a new society. We're the ones who can be the makers of a new world. And I feel like that's a lot of like even the year of Baldwin will be tapping into that. Can we create these spaces in the social life of Philadelphia, in the life world of Philadelphia, where people of all different kinds of ages can be drawn out and to be part of this new kind of society that we like feel, but is only like literally only the people can be the ones who make it. And yeah, I feel like it's a less, in some ways, it's something that like people may not kind of one-to-one understand is like, oh, this is also a kind of a revolutionary struggle, like what we're doing. But I think I see it as like almost like two fronts of you need to have like the actual mass civil disobedience, like all of the protests that are happening against like the war agenda, the deep state, all of that stuff that was mentioned earlier, but a lot of it too, and I think they work together in a lot of ways. But yeah, there needs to be like that force which draws people out of just this kind of like this kind of isolation and the sense of I can't trust anyone in society because I don't know like who's gonna like kill me, I don't know who's gonna shoot me, like I don't know who's gonna betray me, and also a social bond that is created on the very clear basis of ideas as well. Because yeah, it's been very interesting. Like this is, I don't know if we were going to talk about this, but it's been very, very interesting observing the reactions to Kissinger's death.
The reaction.
Henry Kissinger's death.
Oh yes.
Because it's also, in some ways, it's like kind of it's a reflection of the kind of development of the American ruling class, where I think Kissinger, for all of the terrible things he did, reflected a more basically intelligent ruling class in a lot of ways. Like he actually did have like a serious, and this is part of the reason why I feel like maybe the Chinese respect him slightly more, not just because of the fact that he helped him, create the U.S.-China relationship, but also that like he was, for all of his actual like war crimes and all that stuff, he was like a systems thinker. And like even if that system was basically U.S. imperialism and hegemony, like he was still someone who thought actually about the systemic nature of it, and like was also very open about, oh, we're trying to defend these certain things and all that. Whereas I feel like something that's been very interesting is basically over the past couple decades of American leadership after basically the generation of Kissinger and Brzezinski and all those people, is you have increasing generations of more stupid elites, like more literally just more like insane, illogical. They can't even deal with reality because they're so high off of their own ideology. But this is part of the grotesqueness also of the kind of the corruption that takes place because of imperialism, because imperialism itself is essentially like a remnant of a dying epoch of human civilization. And it's destined to produce like these increasingly like grotesque, like also mediocre ruling class people, the kinds of which like we see like basically running like the Biden administration today. But I feel like part of what that poses to people is not just the condemnation of a Kissinger, but also the recognition that things have gotten much worse, at least in terms of the ideological, like the constitution of this current ruling elite, where it does pose the question, can the American people mount their own answer to the ruling class in this time? And one which is actually sophisticated enough and genuine and concrete enough to deal with this question of America cannot survive as an empire any longer. Can she become a new kind of nation out of that? And but it's just like, I don't know, I feel like part of what's missing is it's very easy to be in this place of, oh, I just condemn Kissinger. But it's not, you're not really answering the question of, can the people mount their own kind of ideological response and ideological alternative to the ideology that has basically governed the American empire up until this point, both in terms of the so-called pragmatists like Kissinger and also the the insane neocons who have come in his wake. But yeah.
Wow. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I wanted to emphasize or draw out more this thing you mentioned about bringing people back into social life, because that's also what I've been thinking about. And I want to connect it back to like this thing about King in time, but then also what we had been talking about with the children in Palestine, or just Palestine in general, because I thought what you said that really stuck out to me, Derek, was how you said for the magnitude of a human being that King was, he actually lived a long time. And that was interesting, because then of course, like, my mind goes back to this thing that King says where we're inheritors of the colony of time, or like we live in the colony of time, but we're inheritors of the empire of eternity. Because I think on Instagram Reels a couple days ago, I don't know if any of you guys saw this as well, but I think it was like a Muslim who had posted something about like the attitude of the Israeli people versus the attitude of the Gazan people. And they linked it to time and like this idea of the shaheed, where they said, like, even if a Gazan child dies, their life, like their soul moves forward in eternity. And so that even one life is not enough to contain the soul or the spirit of the Palestinian people. And then they said, versus for the Israelis, even one lifetime is not enough, like for them to become anything, like for their souls to mature. Like, I was looking for it, but I couldn't find it again. But they were basically saying, like, so for me, what explains it is actually Huey Newton's quote, where he says, like, to die for the revolution is as heavy as a mountain, like to die for reaction is like light as a feather. But I'm just trying to wrap my head around that, because this conversation, and also our conversations about the world situation the past couple weeks, is really just emphasizing to me the imperative on the American people right now, like all of the American people, because a lot of people are also saying, like, wow, like my heart is broken over what's happening in Palestine. I just wish there was something I could do. Like, I don't know what I can do besides donate or like share things. But actually, if you reduce it to a very simple level, you should learn from the example. There are very simple things that you can draw from the example of the Gazan children and people, which is also the example that you would draw from someone like King, which is, how can you become like a shaheed, not in a dramatic sense, but take history, take time back into your own hands, because I think it's just a really bitter and like funny, historic and like anachronistic irony that American people don't know how to participate in American society, which is so deep, because American society changes like the waves of how the world moves. So if the state has paralyzed the American people in this way, like that just has a great world consequence. And then you contrast it with the Gazan children and people who are saying, like, it's very simple, like, I will want a future of education. I will want a future of science, so that this will never happen again to my family, to like my people, to my brothers and sisters. Just like very, very simple, clear things. And so, yeah, the last thing I just wanted to say, going back to this point that Jeremiah had made about the contribution of, the project of Free School and the people in it, and also a project like Avant-Garde, which is what Jeremiah, Tony, and I had been talking about last night, is to clarify the pathway for people to become a part of American social life again, because that is a moral question, but it's also a very private question. And we were talking about this last night, but if you look at the way that we live or that we move around the city, we're not extraordinary human beings. We have families, like you said, Jared. We have jobs. Like we're also just in the city, but morally, like we're somewhere else where we see ourselves as a part of the American people. We see ourselves as the makers of American history, like and that just changes everything. Like it really changes everything. And so I just, I don't know, this conversation just really clarified that for me.
Yeah, I preserve a lot of my thinking and the way how y'all kind of contributions. I was gonna bring my documents that I got when I was in the bicentennial when I was a lot younger, but I was like a student, like I must have a copy of the Declaration of Independence. But it's not just that, but it only means something to me. Y'all. It's kind of like having an original meaning to original ideas, and when you're trying to preserve something over your lifetime, and you don't know where I'm going to put this at. I don't want it to get damaged, but when something moves that thing to me, and I move it back to the thing that should be there, and sometimes students don't get that movement. So when y'all said that about having the Fourth American Revolution, I'm sitting home in my notebook and I'm looking at my notebook, over decades, because I don't really have I've never had some other ambition. If I wasn't doing this, I was doing this. But that's how the revolutionary feeling from it. But it's all of these documents, some y'all writing, and some of the ones y'all reminded me again, especially the things about King. And I wasn't like old to be like an older person when King was assassinated. I was in high school, but I wasn't like some high school mentality that was all the way above the way I grew up. But that kind of principles of the papers that y'all bring, that's the principles of the revolutionary study that the whole world, whether it's Mao or anybody else that wanted to utilize, human energy, for higher causes and not just, a pet fancy thing to happen for the day. Because I don't think I was raised like that just for just go and do anything you want to do for the day. My family set me out, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, until you find a company of people that you can really have your dedication in your life to have, real true meaning. In other words, I don't want to have a meaningless day. I don't want to have I didn't put in to have a meaningless existence either. But it's a lot when students come and they bear their soul or bear their cross. And I'm like, we're in the crossroads. I might call it the crossroads, but it's not something I don't control the crossroads. It's children that I grew up with that make me believe the world got to be better.
Yeah.
If I didn't think about the children, I can't get for the morning. It's something that makes me want to get up so that we can start this climb together. You can't climb it by yourself.
Well, just to add one quick thing. I mean, with the magnitude of the crisis, it's like, imagine if the people in Gaza or Palestine are just saying, "Oh, I just don't want to do anything today." Like, you know what I'm saying? They have a very strong human instinct, which is that everything needs to change, and we will shoulder that.
When I might use the word how the saints. If you don't read about saints, it's kind of hard to acknowledge. But if you're younger, when you're young, you're still young enough, and you have that inclination to put your heart someplace. And the people that's in the Gaza, they know all eyes are going on, but it's not the human eye all the time that unravels you. It's just something that changes your day, because that's a lot of fear walking around and fear every day. But it always was a lot of great Muslim colleagues that I read about, and I really probably treasure them, and I treasure their letters too. And it's something when you don't think about these people. I think about Khalid bin Walid. These are all martyrs in the way for humanity. Whether Muslim, Jew, or Christian, wherever you was, they just you live in the land that we live in. We love the land that you love. We drink out the same rivers. We drink the same water. We don't drink different water than other people in the world. We all come from the same waters. Well, anyway, it's something when the children they had to learn. I used to learn. I wasn't a Hafiz to recite the Quran, but I learned about what these little kids could do. These little kids is Hafiz, and I'll go back to King, and King was just this little man child as a kid, but growing up and knowing that he was going to be responding to people much older than him, and they was not used to maybe thinking that this little person 20-something years old talking to these congregations. So it's the same thing. When somebody look at y'all, I'm not even basing it on age, because you might not even look like the physical age of what I'm listening to Jeremiah. The age might not come to you like that. It might come to you. I might use the word the wisdom of the ages is different, because it don't need your year you was born. It just needs you to respect what you trying to bring voice to.
But this is so interesting, and if I could just link you and Michelle together, invoking King's idea of living in the colony of time, but aspiring towards the empire of eternity. And I think, as I listen to us speak, it's like we're aspiring to the empire of eternity. And like you said it, I mean, it was very moving when you said that the Shaheed have achieved the empire of eternity, and the Israelis are locked in the colony of time.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
No, that was a good way to put it.
I was just looking up this quote from King. This idea that he would always say that the cross we bear precedes the crown we wear. That we all have to bear the cross. We all have to go through the fire. You know what I'm saying? If we want to wear the crown, achieve victory. That idea of the Christians, death wears thy victory. Death wears thy sting. And so there is something to this, I think. Go. Oh, I'm sorry, Eddie, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the way that we've been talking about King, it makes me, I'm only that much more conscious, aware of how, I guess, our responsibility, what we're doing, lies with King. So, for example, even just the analysis that King was doing, this science of human action, which is characterizing, some of the categories of people that exist in society and the way they interact in motion. That's the task that we have. That's what we try to do every week for the purpose of making social change. For King, finding the way to connect all of these forces, which are social demands, to a common thread of unity, and to give to the American people the ideas to see it that way, clarity of vision for the future, and a way to get there with the power of nonviolence, so that ultimately the people can decide for themselves the new America that can be born. A democratic process of building this new America. That's how I'm also viewing the year of Baldwin. I would love to be as great as King, but I'm not that there. So we're gonna have to distribute the load. But that's the totality of the task.
Wow.
I was gonna say we could do comments.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna read the good morning. So
Just speak up a little bit.
Shantu says good morning, preschool. Miss you all. Todd says good morning. Don DeBar, Daniel Gutierrez, BK, Marty, Blaze say good morning. Corba says good morning. Miss being with everyone. Look forward to the discussion. Jacob Carpenter says good morning, preschool. I can't stay long because we just had a baby.
Oh,
Congratulations. Congratulations, Jacob. And then Blaze said beautiful to the King's speech. And then Brother Abdul Muhammad says teach. Doc, that's when you were saying that you just have to speak to your experience.
Say that again.
When you were talking about your experience growing up with King and like being radical, and then what happens to, I guess, people in your generation who don't have anything that they can say after all these years. So, Don DeBar was saying it's Russell Rickford, associate professor of history at Cornell. Julian Thompson says, there is a truth, but it has to be sought. I have empathy for those that succumb to trauma or distractions and miss the opportunity for revolutionary and spiritual practice. That is indeed the struggle. My favorite revelation about Du Bois is just how much his wisdom became sharper and more impactful as he continuously strove for new knowledge over his 95-year life. Don DeBar was, I think, just giving some historical context about the Russian Revolution and the fact that the Tsarist government had collapsed. He says the Kerensky government was between the Romanovs and Bolsheviks. And so that was the February and October revolutions. Todd, I think this was during the conversation about monasticism with Derek and Ransom.
Because Todd is a Buddhist.
Todd is a Buddhist and he lives a semi-monastic life in New Mexico. So he just said, ouch. Oh no.
He's talking about you guys.
The thing is, it took him about 10 minutes after that to actually process.
Yeah.
I think that was. Okay. Don says one way.
Well, what about the one
wait,
right
okay.
before?
Oh yeah. Well, okay, because I think BK has a pretty big question, and then Don tried to like sort of respond to it. But the question is, how would the elimination of the ruling class via nonviolence play out? What could it potentially look like practically? Would it be of an economic focus? And he just said thank you. And then Don says, one way to eliminate the ruling class through nonviolence might be to build new structures that are built and owned and managed by the people, and that as these develop, render the old ones irrelevant or powerless. Of course, the enemy can't be expected to just stand by and watch. And I feel like that's also kind of what we had been talking about in preschool too, where it's like, if the part of what the ruling class is trying to achieve is to basically push people into their systems of like living and existing or even engaging in like a certain ideology or a certain way of like living and interacting with each other. In some ways, I think it's also related to that King speech where he says, the way that some people respond to like the pain and struggle in the world is just to withdraw. And in some ways that is like one form of resistance where it's saying like, I won't be a part of this anymore. But he makes sure to, I think, clarify that there's still a better way, which is to come back into the struggle with a sense of like creative love. And I feel like that's what we're trying to say, because I don't know, I was also just thinking about how Michelle was saying, isn't it remarkable that Americans themselves like don't even feel compelled to be a part of the social life of this world? Like when it could make such a big difference, like when it really could mean something. And then, yeah, Jahan said, good morning. Very important speech by King. I'm especially struck by his arguments about power, love, and nonviolence. The debate about the relationship between power and morality is very important.
Should go on to the report on where we are in the
Yeah, I think awesome. So actually this conversation that we've had earlier today is very much connected to ideas, or conversation around King and his speech is very much connected to the ideas of Du Bois and Baldwin, which we in free school are rooted in, because all three actually speak to the importance of our children and youth and understanding where children or youth are at. Because in a time of crisis, one can choose to retreat, withdraw, do their thing. But the question is, what happens to your children and your children's children? What Du Bois calls the mortal child. And with even someone like King, I was also reading earlier on Baldwin's, was called The Dangerous Road Before Martin Luther King Jr., in which he wrote in 1961. And he speaks of meeting King or seeing King from far away in the civil rights movement, and looking up to King and eventually meeting him and the kind of man he was. And in that way, Baldwin both serves as a witness, but also a witness to the civil rights movement and its development, and also a part of it too, where Baldwin himself as the same as King, saw that the movement of the times was towards a radical revolution of values, meaning how people themselves will have to transform. And this is back to the Nicodemus story that King talks about in order to also change America. Because it goes back, and I say all this to say the importance of figures like King and Baldwin and Du Bois, and how even the free school is continuously discovering who these figures were and what they mean to our times. And so for 2024 will be the year that we celebrate, or the free school celebrates the year of Baldwin. It's his 100th birth anniversary because he was born on August 2nd, 1924. And the title will be God's Revolutionary Voice. And each of those components, and it goes back, because the free school had also celebrated Baldwin. And that title still remains so relevant for our times. And even in our earlier discussion, we talked about who is God? What does God mean for the oppressed?
Yes.
And even all the free schools discussions about liberation theology and the Black prophetic tradition. Because when we say God, it's also what Baldwin says, where for Baldwin, he was saying how, my writings can be incoherent because America is incoherent and the people are also incoherent. And if America is to transform, the people also it will not be by an act of God, but by the people. But what is the role of God? And, in free school saying God's revolutionary voice, who is Baldwin speaking to? And what are the ideas that he is writing about? And so we've had many discussions, in planning for, or in starting to map out the year of Baldwin, how do we.
Who it's dedicated to.
Yes.
Oh, I'm
And,
sorry.
no. But it will be dedicated to the immortal children of Gaza. And so this idea of children, this idea of, the mortality of children, and also specifically Gaza, where we were saying, what is the magnitude of the crisis today, where something like what's happening in Gaza and Palestine can happen in the world. And for many people who see something as terrible as that, it can be very disheartening. And for those who feel like there is no way, or there is no way to change things, they retreat. But your retreat means that this can continue to happen, or you're okay with this continue to happen. We've had this conversation of, no, like there is a way out for people, and it is for, where people is what King and Baldwin believe are able to understand what is truly happening in the world, or truly happening to themselves and the world around them, and therefore affect change. So it will be dedicated to the moral children of Gaza. And when we say God's revolutionary voice as well, particularly for Baldwin, many of us have been reading Baldwin throughout the years. We have the reading group at Lotus. Individuals have been reading Baldwin, and many of us have found that Baldwin has given the people the language to see themselves and the world. And what this means is that for figures such as King, Baldwin, not only were they able to see the political landscape of their times, but also the moral and spiritual landscape of their times, where it's both a matter of the heart and of the mind. And even as I'm speaking, I'm trying to parse out, dedication to Baldwin versus King, but you can't really separate the two. And the ideas are so connected, where, Baldwin is always talking about love, this concept of love, and how, growing up in Harlem, especially through his father, he had seen how you can end up hating America and hating white society. But what does that do to you? Because even until his father's deathbed, he was very filled with resentment. and bitterness. But Baldwin would say that there's an alternative way out. And that's also what King is saying,
Yeah.
where it is love, where many can choose to isolate themselves, many can choose to hate and to destroy, but there's a third way out, which is the revolutionary way, to create a new path for our children, to not have to continue to live the way it's been for us. And so it really is in the spirit that, you know, we're studying King, but also, or studying Baldwin and King. But it's almost, I actually really like that it will be a year in dedication to, because that's also representative actually of the how monumentous the task is. Where transforming individuals is not easy. It's not that, you know, you come to a single lecture or class or symposium and you're immediately a revolutionary. But it's what Baldwin saw, I think, too, like what matter of man was he, where he was so dedicated, never talked about himself, like the threats on his life, the pressures that he was facing, but he saw that he was responsible for many reasons. The people had identified King as a symbol and a figure for the movement that was developing amongst the people, and King saw that responsibility. And so with that, he dedicated his life to the movement. And so I think even with the year, I think Emily will talk more in terms of the structure, the framework of how the free school will seek to go to the people, have conversations with people, bring people out, and understand in studying Baldwin what it means for their lives and the people around them and the communities around them.
Well, so the way in terms of the actual architecture of the year throughout 2024, we see it as 3 pillars. So the first pillar is what I refer to as the reading groups. And this is based off of all the reading groups that we did in the year of Du Bois in 2018. And so the reading groups we'll have some of us in each of them throughout the city, but we have some tentative locations that I wanted to share. But the idea is that, like, the year of Baldwin, all the destruction that the ruling class has done to community institutions, churches, libraries, schools, actual schools, high schools, elementary schools, universities, that with the year of Baldwin, the free school is going to the grassroots. And so the reading groups are a central part of that, like to actually bring Baldwin's words and his life to the people, and for us in conversations to use Baldwin's life and his words to kind of face ourselves and ask the question of who this nation is and what this nation must become. But the reading locations will meet, it depends on the different locations, but they'll meet maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. And the readings will be decided by the different groups. There will probably be somewhat of a shared syllabus or shared selection of readings and documentaries and different ways of showing Baldwin's life and words. But we'll talk about that as we keep planning. But the tentative locations of the city are, of course, already Penn. So at the University of Pennsylvania, Michelle Perba and Nuri have already been a part of Lotus. But then we also have confirmed the central branch, the Parkway Central branch of the Free Library as a reading location once again. We're in conversation with South Philadelphia High School and Strawberry Mansion High School to do an extracurricular Baldwin reading group. And that's really exciting because it's actually a way of trying to engage like high schoolers in the city around James Baldwin. We have tentative locations, possibly at Lincoln University, Wooden Shoe Books, which is on South Street. And then we still need to have, and then another tentative location at Muhammad Mosque, number 12, of course, of Nation of Islam in Germantown. And then hopefully we can also have a location here at the First Unitarian Church. There's some other locations we're still discussing, like Mother African Zawar United Methodist Church with Osaze, and the Philadelphia Senior Center. But besides the in-person Philadelphia reading groups, we're also going to have hopefully a satellite location in Chicago, a satellite location in New Mexico, and then a satellite location in Bangalore, India.
Mhm.
But so that's the first pillar. The second pillar is a podcast and avant-garde. And actually the way at first I was a little like when Doc was like, we should do a podcast where we read the words of Baldwin, like to hear the words of Baldwin and have a discussion every week, like an hour and a half discussion, highly produced, like very engaging. At first I was like worried about how much work it would be, but then I thought about Derek, something you said like 1 month ago at this time about tone, like in Gaza, like the tone, like the call, a tone, and the ripple effect it has. And then I was like, yeah, we have that second pillar. It's going to be avant-garde in a podcast. It's going to be about, different forms of the ideological struggle, but also the words of Baldwin, the tone, the impact it has to even just constantly have that tone in people's ears.
Could you just say a little bit more about that tone? Could you just say a little more about the tone of his words?
Oh, I was actually talking about more of a call, but the tone works, like tone of his words too, like how important it is to just hear, like I think to hear his words right now. But I also think it's important for people who tune into the podcast to hear other people engaging with his words. Like I think there's something different about hearing like that. Okay, and then the third pillar would be year-long events. That's also similar to the Year of Du Bois in 2018, where we'll have specific events throughout the year. And the first event of the year will be on February 17th at the Central Branch of the Free Library. And the Education, Philosophy, and Religion Department signed on to partner with us for the whole year. And so they are going to have the launch on the 4th floor of the Free Library. It's like, I actually haven't been there still, but apparently it's very beautiful. And usually it's booked for weddings, but I guess libraries are new wedding locations, but we're gonna take back that room for the people, and it's going to be, and so we'll have the big inaugural launch of the Year of Baldwin, like here in Philadelphia, and say why Baldwin, why Philadelphia, and also what it means for the nation in the world, to make a new nation, a new America, and like Baldwin said, to make America the last white nation, which changes the whole world. And then we'll also focus on, like what Alice described, this thing of God's revolutionary, James Baldwin, God's revolutionary voice. Because I also think, for me, it's a really emotional title, because even in dedication to the immortal children of Gaza, is to say that a country that allows children in Gaza to be killed, it's the same country that allows children in Philadelphia and America to be killed, and forever to be killed. And I also think there's something that King says, where he says, my optimism sometimes wanes, but I refuse to submit myself to defeat. This thing that, and more and more I feel that even no matter how much our culture or institutions are deliberately destroyed by the ruling class, the thing that cannot be destroyed is the spirit of a people. And I really think the Year of Baldwin is a call to the people to achieve what King said, which is to be able to call out and say, we are the children of God. And so that's the third pillar. Yeah, so the first event is February 17th. That will be the inauguration of the Year of Baldwin. And we'll show Baldwin's clips of Baldwin. There will be some speakers, and then there'll also be an intercivilizational cultural performances. And I'm hoping that, I talked to Michelle and you guys, the organizing committee, about it, but we're hoping to also have someone like Leo Gadsden and the Producers Guild talk about the city, I don't know, fighting the struggle of the people of Philadelphia. That the people, there's something really special about, especially the Black proletariat, Black people in Philadelphia who've always never given up. And that's why something like the Producers Guild still exists. It's why someone like Leo Gadsden or even Ransom, that you still are here and speaking and organizing concerts. And so I feel like something like that needs to be said the inauguration. And then the second event will be on April 4th, which is both the anniversary of King's assassination and also the anniversary of Martin Luther King's speech, A Time to Break Silence, while standing up against the Vietnam War. And so that will be very relevant for our times. And then there are more events, but I think that's as far as I'll describe.
The call to artists.
Yeah, and then the last, it's not really a pillar, but it's something something we've talked about is James Baldwin was born in August 2nd. And we'll celebrate his official 100th birth anniversary. His birthday?
Wow.
Yeah.
His mother.
Oh,
Oh my God.
that's so good. But we're gonna, August for his birth month, 100th anniversary birth month, we'll launch a public art exhibition, half at the central branch of the Free Library, half at City Hall. And as we were thinking about, because I think some people went to this really terrible Palestinian Israeli film that didn't really give justice to the struggle of the Palestinian people and that spirit that Michelle talked about. It made me think that this public exhibit talking about Baldwin's life, but also not just his life, but him as a nexus of a movement of the people and certain ideas, that we should put out a call to revolutionary artists and poets to include an exhibit. This thing of like, I don't know, like the tone, like you said about that tone from the top of a mosque, like that call, like a call to the revolutionary artists and poets to contribute to the remaking of a new America. Because the people are already there, but they're waiting for that call to be sent out. And I love the imagery of that. A people revolutionary artists and poets waiting for a call, and they could be any age too. And so we want to put out that call as part of that exhibit. And so the public exhibition still needs to be worked out. And I think people in free school work it out, like have a vision for it. But I'm really excited at the mix of like the Free Library is giving us access to their rare books department because they have some of Baldwin's original copies. And then, pulling from the blocks and archive, like from the blocks and archive, from the rare books department, so historical stuff, but then also art, original art, and then other types of art, prints, poetry, and just really painting James Baldwin in that way. So that's another.
Wow.
Oh,
Can I just,
yeah.
just in the structure, I think we should, I'm just thinking with you, we should reach out to the libraries at the University of Pennsylvania and Temple University. And I think that could be facilitated through the central branch, but also to the blocks and collection as well.
Yeah.
That all of these that have probably rare papers of Baldwin's, when and where and how these libraries, these university libraries will get involved. It's hard to say, but I think we should think about reaching out to them. And perhaps these libraries could declare a year of Baldwin and do various things during the year.
Could I add something? Well, maybe something we can also think about is reaching out to the Schomburg archives in Harlem. And then also potentially connected to the Harlem Public Libraries, because some of us are reading Go Tell It in the Mountain right now, and it's funny because it's quite autobiographical, especially the first chapter. But he literally talks about going to the libraries in Harlem growing up as a young man, and then eventually wanting to make his way to the Central Library in New York that has the giant stone lions. And the way he talks about it, where he's like, it's a center of knowledge. And I wanted to be ready for the world when I went to, I wanted to be ready for the greatness of the Central Library when I went there. And so first, he said, I wanted to cut my teeth by reading all the books at the Harlem Public Library. But actually, it's quite beautiful when he talks in those passages about looking at the skyline from Central Park and everything. I just think maybe eventually, since we're also talking about the lifeboat of Baldwin, want to think about maybe something between Philadelphia and Harlem. because even the jazz there, I think there's a very like dialectical relationship. But I actually wanted to say a little bit about what we had been seeing with like reading James Baldwin with Penn students. Because first things first, I think if it potentially shows anything, it is that this is a really ripe time for James Baldwin, for these young people. Like taking up his ideas comes remarkably naturally to them in a way that I would not have said was true 5 years ago per se, when the historic moment was different in a lot of ways, and identity politics, for example, was bigger, because like we're reading Giovanni's Room in Lotus now, and we started reading it a month ago, and something that we established at the start was that this wasn't just Baldwin as a victim or like Baldwin as a gay Black man in his novel. But the funny thing was, looking back, I felt like it's something that we didn't even really need to say, because people weren't going in with that framework. And that was impressive to me, because 5 years ago, that was like the only framework that people would have been reading something like Giovanni's.
How do you explain that, bro?
Well, I mean, we've talked about this a lot in preschool, but I don't think identity politics is holding up to the way that the American crisis and the world crisis is accelerating and developing. And yeah, it's not holding up, but then also, I think it is also connected to how this this Gen Z cohort, which is like 10 years younger than someone my age maybe, it's almost like they're just so ripe in a way for like a reality that doesn't even quite exist yet. And I see this with the way that they talked about, like they defend the Palestinian people, where they said, oh, you lied to me about 9/11, so like you'll never lie to me again. And fuck Biden. Like it's so impressive, because yeah, but anyway, like I don't want to linger on that too long, because I actually wanted to go back to this formulation of like James Baldwin as God's revolutionary voice. I love that so much, because I think it originally came from Amiri Baraka eulogizing him, saying like, oh, James Baldwin was God's revolutionary mouth. But I love that for free school we said, yes, and in fact, like he's God's revolutionary voice, which makes it even more prophetic. Like, but it's because something that we had talked about in Giovanni's Room, and in our discussion of Giovanni's Room with the Penn students, like Penn, I feel that it attracts a lot of New England type students, which is also like the Du Boisian tradition in a way, where you really look to writers like Whitman, or just, you know, this New England intellect. And we had spent a little bit of time talking about that when we first started reading. But something that we came to was how James Baldwin belongs in the American canon. And that if you see yourself studying the American literary tradition or the American artistic tradition, you go through people like Whitman, T.S. Eliot, Hemingway, Steinbeck, Dickens. And then if you go through the European lineage, you go through like James Joyce or Henry James. But what we wanted to establish was that Baldwin belongs in this canon, and you can't get around it, because also the civil rights movement has happened. This isn't 1940 anymore. But then, of course, he's also an evolution of, like, he's also a negation or like a greater achievement of the American tradition, because people like Whitman, T.S. Eliot, Hemingway, I feel like you could also say that they were a part of the Empire of Eternity in a way. They were writing out of God's voice, but Baldwin really is like writing out of God's revolutionary voice. And I just wanted to say that, because I also feel that writers like Hemingway and T.S. Eliot and Whitman have been digested and redigested by the American people and so much of the American intelligentsia. And in a way, I don't mean to be harsh, but in a way, I feel like their contributions have actually been exhausted already. Like the seeds have already been planted and the flowers have already grown for its contribution to America as a nation. But I think what's so invaluable about us bringing Baldwin back is I don't think that has been achieved with Baldwin's ideas yet, where he belongs in the canon, but he hasn't, the American people haven't absorbed like his contribution fully yet. And this is what this year-long campaign is in dedication to. Because if the American people will come to know Baldwin on Baldwin's terms, the American people will also be transformed in a way that they were transformed by people like Hemingway and T.S. Eliot Whitman. So I just think, yeah, it's invaluable what we're going to do.
I'm sitting here smiling because all those books that you mentioned, right? I think I get to read, not T.S. Eliot, but I can look on my bookshelf when you see it. I'm looking at like Whitman,
Yeah.
and Keats, all of them. I call myself a transcendentalist. Even somebody who think that I'm not in that. It's kind of like in a certain kind of vein. But to me, Baldwin is like he's the new person in this new. It's like a commune of voices, and he's in that commune. But like you say, why he not in that club? Well, he really is. He's already a transcendentalist in my way of thinking of transcendental, not from the 1800s or the 1700s. It's just something that part of our vibe is that we can vibe together like that. It's like a vibe, but he needs to be read like that and not forcefully read to fit into something, that he can't fit. He already is wearing all these ties and all this, these things that he says these things. I look at the things he wears, his cuffs on his. It's some things that he could be a Victorian, an Edwardian, or he could be an Olympian. He can go through all of those ages, and I'll still say he's a transcendentalist because he's bringing something to the forefront that I'm like, he already is. He's an artist. I'm a painter. I'm a painter.
Yeah.
And I feel, I can feel his work even if I was using a brush, because he's that person. And I think I like how he brought to be one of these pillars.
Oh yeah. If I could, the other thing, I don't know whether we mentioned it yet in our meetings. There's a Buford Delaney who painted so many portraits of Baldwin. But there's so many photographic images of Baldwin that I don't know of any Black intellectual that has been so studied through photography.
Oh, yeah.
Paintings of his. I mean, he's just, back in the days, and I think Ransom and Derek will agree with me here. People were, who was that little ugly man? He was not considered handsome or good, but now he's considered so strikingly handsome.
Yes.
And even you put him up, because our image back then was a Hollywood image of a handsome Black man or a handsome man. Kirk Douglas and all of these people. And then, of course, we got Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier, who were tall and regal, but still Baldwin is short and African, in his features. So we have all of these images of him. And then all of the documentaries and all of the videos of him speaking.
Yeah.
So we have so much a call to artists, a call to photographers, a call to painters and poets, because here I'm agreeing with you completely, Derek. What he evokes in the American people up to this day goes beyond anyone else. No one else. I mean, Melville or I don't know. I figure Hemingway. Not even the important Black writers like Ralph Ellison or Richard Wright. None of them evokes what, and we have to find out why that is the case. There is something about him that no other artist brings forward in the people. The other thing is that Baldwin is considered the father of the modern American essay. And some consider him the greatest essayist in the English language. And I think there's a case to be made. So, we have a lot, and this is, I have to say, I just don't know how we can draw upon academics. Who are they? What are they interested in? Because it would be useful if we could find among them some who had studied his essays. I'm really interested in a person who has some expertise who could talk about and write about, this is, I guess, for avant-garde, his essay writing, or his sentence structure, his mode of punctuation. So I'm just saying, this is a year of discovery for ourselves along with the people. The other thing I wanted to say, because, we discovered there are 2 other years of Baldwin going on, right? Not year, what did it, one?
Yeah, I guess centennial.
Centennial, yeah. They didn't say a year, they said
They were like
a
centennial.
month or something, a day or something. But I think this is the only one that is a year-long celebration. The other thing is to not separate Baldwin from what he was about, and that was the struggle.
Yeah.
And that's why to the immortal children of Gaza. And it's not this artsy, oh, he was such a flamboyant artist and yada, 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 but that he was a revolutionary, and I think God's revolutionary voice, children of Gaza. And, but I do like the call to artists and writers and poets. I think we have to work on how to do that.
Yeah.
And I think August, I was also thinking, I don't know what you think, that at some point because we do everything inside, it would be good if the call to artists and writers could have events that are also outside.
Yeah.
Outside the free library, because there's a lot going on across the street.
Yeah, in that area.
Yeah, in that area. Of course, outside the Clark Park, I guess everybody goes there. I don't know how y'all feel about that.
But you know what, they'll have a situation where, you intend to have it outside, but have a situation where you have access to an inside.
Yeah.
In the event of rain or something.
True that.
So the event is so important that it has to happen.
That's right.
You see what I'm saying?
No question. And see, this other thing, we have to find a way to collaborate, Branson, with Leo and you, the Producers Guild, because you all will know how to combine the musicians with Baldwin. Yeah. I know both, and I know Leo, knowing Leo, that's right up his alley, and his crew of people, including Craig. We got to talk to Craig about this.
I talk to Craig every day.
Okay, so
That's one of my best friends.
Yeah. And by the way, I hadn't thought about. This has been going on in my head, Branson. I don't know if everybody knows that Ransom. I'm sorry, man. Ransom used to talk every Tuesday on the phone to Sun Ra.
Yes. His number was in the phone book.
No.
And I had a job working 11 to 7. I had a lot of time on this job. And the first time I called him, he instructed me to call him at the strike of midnight every Tuesday. And I did that for like 3 years. And then the phone got he was so funny. He was a genius. I'm gonna be honest with you. I thought Sunrise was. I love the same thing. But I thought Sunrise was a good-natured nut. But then when I started talking to him, and then he would say things, and then he would decode his language. And that's when I found out the genius that he was. You know what I mean? Oh man, he was so.
But
and he would talk longer than he wanted to talk. He was just
Ransom. One of the things we have to do. We were talking about this last night about avant-garde. We have to interview you.
Yeah.
I mean, a really high quality, long interview. And we want to relate your experiences with Sun Ra to Baldwin. But that's, we want to do this because, and as you all say, we want it to be Philadelphia. And there's a lot here. I mean, this is a gritty, poor, unequal, a lot of ways uneducated city with all the potential in the world.
Yeah.
And we have to, so, just get yourself ready, Ransom. We have to, and the music, but I was thinking, how we gonna get some outside things, outside the free library. The Sky Room, where we'll have the inauguration, is a wonderful room, one of the newer parts of this free library. And it seats over 100 people. It's very nice. It's, in fact, it has 2 large screens where if you show movies, people, no matter where you sit, you got a great seat at looking at it. Something else about that room I wanted to say.
There's,
I'm sorry.
there's an outside area as well
Yes,
to it.
Yes. And we're talking about the inauguration from 11 to 5, because the library closes at 5 on Saturdays. So I think that'll be enough time for us. Did you want to say who we would think, some of the people we're thinking about inviting to speak?
Well, while Emily looks that up, I think one other thing is that during the summer, we're thinking about like a summer of film screenings.
Yes.
Because there's just so much out there on like Baldwin himself speaking. And you can just feel the gentle but also strong nature of him, how brilliant he is in debates, but also in conversation. And so, because especially with this partnership with the Free Library and then others that we would want to build following today's conversation, I imagine, I think we were thinking like every Friday, every Saturday, having the summer of film. And, we can have as Ransom was saying, inside if rain, but it's an option that we can show it in. I know Park has it. Logan Circle.
Yeah, that's right out there. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say maybe we can consider reaching out to Cinespeak. If you guys
Say that
thought
again?
this group called Cinespeak, they organize a lot of film events. But I say that because last summer they screened the new documentary, Max Roach, and they actually had a series in dedication to like jazz in the Black community. Like they had screened, I think maybe like Black Orpheus or something as well. Yeah, but they might be decent.
Yeah, we should consider, partnering with them.
But I mean, this experience also of having these initial conversations with different individuals also has been a surprise for us, or both, because I feel like we've been so often disappointed as well, where like in this partnership with the Free Library even, it's been so pleasant because it shows that, they're young, the 2 individuals, and maybe Serafina and Emily can talk to this too, which is there are 2 individuals that have been really excited to meet the free school because they want to do something, but there's a lack of ideas ideas in which people can take up as their own, organize around. And so with Emily and Serafina talking to them, they're like, yeah, it's like, we can do all this, let us know. And that's helped a lot it showed a lot in terms of how people buried within Philadelphia, there are people who are wanting to think about the world and to meet one another and have
do creative things to change the world. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Dwight and I have been in conversation with Lincoln University, historically Black college, wonderful place where the 2 of us are alumnus. And we want Lincoln to declare next year the year of Baldwin. I have to say, I'm like, I'm always ready for disappointment. For Dwight and I, it's almost a no-brainer for historically Black college, and for Lincoln, the oldest of the historically Black colleges, to say, well, definitely. When do we start? But it seems like it's slow and a little bit too reluctant. But we're in conversation with two great professors there, two women, one a professor of political science and the other a professor of English. And we sent a proposal for a year-long course on Baldwin at Lincoln University, and so on and so forth. But forgive me for putting it this way. Sometimes it would be easier to get a historically white college to do it than a Black college. And that, reasons for that. It's a kind of a don't want to rock the boat. Our situation is kind of precarious. We have to rely upon politicians for funding and so on. And but I still think they could move faster. I think they will move. The president, Dwight met with the president of Lincoln, and she was enthusiastic. She's one of those people who doesn't want Lincoln to become a place that prepares students to get a job. She wants it to be its original form as a liberal arts small college. And frankly, it's a very beautiful place, beautiful part of the state. And they're doing a great job in, modernizing the campus, et cetera. And very great facilities. I mean, they need to, have a national symposium on Baldwin, and they can do it. But I just wanted to, so along with the two high schools, and Brandon Doe and Catherine Blunt are doing, in fact, the proposal that we sent to Lincoln is based upon a proposal written by Catherine. Yeah, really a beautiful thing. But at Strawberry Mansion and South Philly, I mean, these are quote unquote troubled schools. I know Brandon had raised the question of there's some kind of gang violence going on in South Philly, but we're going up in there. We're going up in there. And at Strawberry Mansion, the heart of North Philly, you dig what I'm saying? And who knows where things go from there. We could have gone to Masterman or Central or Girls High, but we went to schools that have kids like Baldwin was. That's the way Baldwin, the same way. So.
Yeah, because with the year of Baldwin, a lot of the major thing that we've been working on is just the foundation, the moral, philosophical, and ideological foundation of the year. And I just wanted to say that working on, because we're also working on the vision statement.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to say that will be hopefully read soon.
And actually, we were also talking, because in a lot of ways you would think the year of Du Bois, I said, oh, we've done the year of Du Bois. We just plug in different names, different readings, and we got the year of Baldwin. Not so. Not so. We felt we could not, like in the year of Du Bois, we got the city council to pass a resolution. We don't want to deal with the politicians this time around because of Gaza and Israel and the Middle East, and because this is an election year, and because we might invite Cornel West or someone else to speak, then we don't want all of these pro-Biden politicians to be telling us, oh, we didn't know you all were having a political thing, you know. So we're not upfront, we're not dealing with them. The other thing is the unions that were more forthcoming, especially 1199, with Henry Nicholas out of the picture. I don't even know how to go up in there. Maybe there is a way that we can. The other unions that are either, dominated by class collaborationists of one form or the well, by class people that really work with the corporations and so on. We don't have that like before. And I have to say, I think the church environment for us is not what it was in the year of Du Bois. So we had to find ways to compensate for the lack of what you might call institutional access. But to be very honest about it, I think it has forced us to be far more creative. And what you see now emerging is like I think who said, Emily or someone said, we said we will go directly to the people. And so, with Catherine and Brandon Doe in the high schools, we didn't have high schools in the year of Du Bois, with Lincoln University, with University of Pennsylvania, and maybe even with the Free Library. The central branch, which is an institution in and of itself, with facilities like no place else.
And the performance space there has good acoustics and everything.
Oh yeah. Have you seen the Sky Room, by the way?
No.
Yeah, and that along with it's as good as the downside, but even brighter and everything.
Oh, you mean like when you have a restaurant up there?
You
Hey,
can
you
see
said-
the skyline, like the Philadelphia skyline from there.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, I don't think
Yeah.
that's all.
Yeah, but we've had to, and so we're still navigating all of that. And then I don't think we mentioned that we want to have co-sponsors or partners in this, the Producers Guild, perhaps the Philadelphia Writers Museum, other as partners in this endeavor. So yeah, so this is a lot different from the year of Du Bois, and I think a lot more consequential, a lot more crucial. And I guess I don't have to say it, but I want to just underline it. The free school is ideologically and politically stronger, and the free school is more able to take on the task of the political moment. I have to say, like Michelle was saying, the headwinds of identity politics and cancel culture and all of that have kind of begun to fall by the wayside. The other thing, and this might be positive, this is just my assessment, the role of petty bourgeois intellectuals and academics is not so strong. And I think the Lotus Reading Group at Penn is proving that.
Well, I don't think we have any comments.
Which means we should.
Yeah, so if no one has anything else they would like to say, you could end.
Well, I just wanted to say that it sounds really beautiful, the whole description of, the whole planning of the year that has already gone in. Sounds really beautiful and fitting because yesterday, Alice and I were talking about how we see all of these reading groups that we're a part of, and we try to talk about different ideas, and really it comes to the question of Baldwin, because I think he is, many of us have really been like moved to a large extent by Baldwin. It was like by starting our reading of Baldwin that we made these decisions to change, to actually change certain things about our lives. And this is what Baldwin offers to the people of America at large. That, yes, we are talking about a new kind of democracy. We are talking about a new peace movement. We're talking about a new American people who are ready to be born. But this requires, I think it really requires an honest look at yourself, which like a lot of us have done it through Baldwin. And I think it's really fitting because you're talking about reading Baldwin throughout the city, and it's not a map. It's not a direct map of reading King and Du Bois, even though we are talking about all of these figures. It's really beautiful how how you were describing all of you, how we are going to spend the the whole year reading Baldwin with everybody. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. It sounds really beautiful.
Yeah, I agree with you because I feel like for me, and I guess a lot of us had this experience, but
Say that again.
a lot of us may have had similar experiences, but reading Baldwin, especially in college, it's something that can actually, I don't even mean this in a flippant way, but actually save someone's life. I feel like I actually feel that way about him.
It's,
Yeah.
it's something about, there's something in the literary gratitude, but it's something that happens to the human being upon that encounter. It's a literary effect. You're trying to restore something about what your whole being is. And I kind of jotted it down. It's like an appreciation of your self-initiating to have like a serious breakthrough, but it's more literary behind your experience. But I'm just looking to hear the experience because I wrote it down. It's like confirming something about how really precious literature really is, and it depends on the quality of the literary person too. To have that, to show that response. So that's amazing. That's amazing testimony.
Life transformed.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I call it. It's having gratitude. You have to have a better meaning for the word, not just being grateful, but gratitude. For your existence. For your existence coming through a literary way. That's something. I mean, people sometimes a person not willing to face themselves like that. It's not an easy thing to ask yourself those kind of daring things that Baldwin is already dared people to come to. He's daring as a person, literally.
I could tell you this already, Derek. As you were speaking, I was saying things to Serafina because we're jointly working on the vision statement, and certain of your formulations, you might think you'd be talking when you read this. Because we got just literary gratitude.
But that's the nature of tone, and I'm still exploring it. I'm exploring it like everybody else is. If somebody can explore it and put it in a literary way, then people gonna really feel what's going on here, and it's not something trite, And other proofs are showing that the people that try to wreck something are falling apart. Now you see use the word architect, you become more architecture in what you're thinking and doing. It's valuable,
Okay.
Wow.
Well, so Julian says, very excited to hear about the year of Baldwin. The vision and plan are powerful. God's revolutionary voice raises an interesting line of inquiry. What is the Saturday Free School's view on God, spirituality, and religion?
Yeah. A lot of people ask us that, but the free school is multi-religious, multi-spiritual. I think all of the major religions are part of free school. And including, which I find very interesting, the Chinese emphasis upon ancestors and nature. But we have Jews, Christians, Muslims, agnostics, African spirituality, But I was going to ask Julian if he could set up a year Baldwin reading group in Atlanta, and whether or not Spelman and Morehouse and the other Black colleges down there would be interested in pursuing a year Baldwin.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Well, I don't know if Julian will type it back in
Yeah,
the chat,
we'll hear back from
or
him.
maybe he'll Facebook message us, but I think that sounds great. But okay, I think that's it for this week's preschool. And next,
You can say that Barbara from Chicago.
Oh, yeah. Thanks to all of our online commentators, and also Barbara who's visiting from Chicago. So thanks for
I hope you enjoyed it, Barbara.
Too many notes.
And this is your first time in Philadelphia.
Wow.
So I said
Yeah, we were joking the whole time, Barbara. Well, because we tried to do the Du Bois walking tour. Like going through the different sites that are significant to Du Bois's study of Philadelphia. And so we started with Mother Bethel AME Church, and then we made our way down to the Du Bois mural on South Street.
Yeah.
On South Street, Church of the Crucifixion, and at that point we stopped our tour. But we then went on a cheesesteak tour.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was funny because Barbara kept commenting like the difference between comparing Philadelphia to Chicago. And being like, oh, we have this in Chicago, we don't have this in Chicago. Yeah.
I don't know personality, I'm from Chicago.
Okay. But anyways, thanks for everyone who participated online, and we'll see you next week. Yeah, the 9th. December 9th again. And okay, bye.